You're listening to Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn. This is episode 36, and today I'm interviewing Atom Bergstrom again for the third time. Atom Bergstrom is a longevity expert. If you haven't listened to the first two interviews with him, definitely go back and listen to those. They're just jam-packed. We have Q&As in both of them. Adam has the website solartiming.com, and he's written a bunch of books. My favorite are the Yellow Fat Disease books, and he has 3 volumes there for $50. Definitely worth it. I get asked all the time for sources. Well, this is full of sources. It's just source after source of the proof of how toxic omega-3s are and how they actually create this substance called lipofuscin, especially in the context of iron overload, which pretty much everybody has. So what chat with Atom Bergstrom wouldn't be complete without lipofuscin? So we talk about that. We talk about red light therapy, zeolite, liposomal formulas, ascorbic acid, and really just focus on longevity and all of the factors that contribute to longevity. And I think Adam's in agreement with me that there are so many factors. A lot of people just focus in on the diet and say, hey, why? Well, if omega-3s are so toxic, then how are the people in Japan that are on this heavy seafood diet living so long, right? The blue zones. But stress is one of the major factors. There's water quality. There's so many more things. Food is just one very small compartment of health. It's important, but lowering stress and getting water quality to a decent point, all of these things are much more important to me. So we talk about that, heavy metals, and we have a really extensive Q&A at the end, which you guys will love. All right, we're here with Atom Bergstrom. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for inviting me back.
Yeah, the last 2 episodes were really awesome with you. That was so much fun. And we touched on lipofuscin a lot, but we didn't really talk too much about longevity, which we both share that passion for. And that's kind of how I got into health, like radical lifespan extension. And what I love about your work, I read your Facebook posts all the time, and you're very aware of nanotech and this kind of transhumanist way. Like there's different ways to live longer, right? And we're kind of both interested in the natural way.
Natural works better. And I think ultimately it's going to work out better too, because I think the Silicon Valley now obviously is really big into life extension. Some of them want 10,000 years. Peter Thiel is even supposedly getting blood transfusions from young people. And they were selling them for $8,000 a pop up there until the FDA cracked down on them. And now you can't get a young person's blood transfusion like you could. But anyway, they have different ways. And I think most of them, they're barking up the wrong tree, to use that expression.
I agree. Yeah, and it's kind of freaky because it links with all the current events that we're dealing with, like the aborted fetal stem cells. And, just like vaccinations, the abortion issue is just as heated, and people get in these large arguments online. But from what I understand, like Planned Parenthood, and it's very questionable where these fetal stem cells end up. And from my research, I've seen celebrities use them in facial products, and they're using them in stem cell injections, right? All sorts of stuff.
And yet there has been research for a long time. I saw it over a decade ago that you could actually get totipotent or omnipotent stem cells from blood. They had a company that was doing it, but they basically pushed them into the background. And even now, Ray Peat said you can make your own stem cells, by certain nutritional ways. And also Gabor Mate and other people like that have pointed out that you can do a lot of this with simply mental power. The power of the mind. Awesome. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Gabor Mate, but he believes almost all diseases are caused by basically having a trauma. That our body normally can handle inflammation, it can handle paralysis, but when you have a childhood trauma particularly, and Donald Lay and the Scientologists agree with this, what you call fetal traumas, and there's much evidence to support that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I definitely want to get into stress and how that affects longevity? Because I guess we could start here. You have a book called Death Busters that I think you just updated. And I love the first line. It says, "Wake up and smell the juvenile hormone within your own fountain of youth. Thymus gland, oh deathless one."
Definitely. Definitely. The juvenile hormone was investigated a lot by, what was his name? Ashley Montague back in the day. He wrote a book on neoteny, which is, there are certain races that actually are younger. In some Oriental races, the skull doesn't even close. You know, the hole in the head that everybody has, and it closes up after you're born within the first year. Some people there have it open till the time they go on cosmic vacation.
How does that happen?
Yeah, they actually, it's something they eat and something they think. And remember, in the East, they did a lot of meditation and a lot of mental work that wasn't done in the West as much. However, it's been covered up. There were yogas of Europe and yogas of the United States and yogas of the American Indian, and even the blacks that were actually here before slavery, that people usually, the 12 tribes they talk about, there's actually validity to that. So there's a whole lot about our anthropology that has been changed, edited for convenience sake.
Interesting. I've been researching like Western culture and civilization, and I believe that, history is written by the winners, and so everything we've taught is so backwards. But do you think a Christian that's maybe skeptical about meditation or yoga, or thinks it's like the devil's work, can still experience longevity and still like have radical life extension?
Definitely. The old-timey Christian monks, they lasted as much as 130. There's names of them many of them were centenarians, and that's right there. You got a start, because many people into health and things like that, they don't even make it to 100. So to me, we need to really research and ask centenarians how they did it. Like Huguette Clark, she has a mansion out here, or had a mansion out here while she was alive. That was on 48-hour standby for any time she was going to visit. Guess what? She didn't visit for 60 years. It was on standby with 50 employees working on it for 60 years. She never visited because she had an entire apartment building, the largest one in New York City. She had a couple of other mansions in various places. And guess where she preferred to live? 20 years in one single hospital room. She liked it there. And she watched cartoons and played with dolls and lived to 104. And she ate a hospital diet. So, there's different ways. That's the yoga way of doing it, which was minimum of nutrition. And then you have the other way of doing it with a maximum amount. And then you have a timing method of doing it also.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I went 180 on that subject of calories and carbs. And for years, for most of the last 8 years, I was of the belief to restrict sugar, restrict calories to live longer. But you could actually do the opposite. And that ties in with thyroid health, right? Eating a lot of sugar, a lot of calories.
Yeah, I'm eating white sugar now, so I'm on that bad list. A lot of people don't know that when they eat brown sugar and raw sugar is illegal in the U.S. And if you check the law, you get sometimes almost raw sugar, but they claim that it's unsuitable for human health. And so what Donald Lay did, he would go to Sugarland, Texas, and say, "I need sugar for my cattle," and then they'd give it to him. But if he said it's for me or for human beings in his restaurant that he had at the time, they wouldn't sell it to him.
And so do you mean like buying sugar in bulk? Because you can go to like Costco and get the C&H or whatever, right? 5-pound, 10-pound bag. But you're talking about maybe hundreds of pounds or something?
He got large amounts, because any of brown sugar, raw sugar is not raw. They lie.
Wow.
Yeah, and you can see, you can go on the internet and find the laws against it. There's been laws against it. I don't know how far back it goes, but when we were going to Adano's school when he was getting that, it was 1975. So it's been illegal for a long time. And people don't believe you because it says raw sugar, it must be raw. The closest to raw sugar is blonde sugar, which you can get those little packets at Starbucks. And a lot of people complain because through the animal bones that they filtered that through, there was viruses, and they kind of hid that information, and I haven't been able to find anything on it since the original newspaper articles appeared. So I prefer white sugar. When you think of it, it's like you take something like vitamin C, and you don't take it with other stuff in it, you get it as vitamin C. Well, the same with white sugar, only vitamin C in a supplemental form is really a approximation of a vitamin. It's not a real vitamin. As Ray Peat has gone into a lot, that it's more like you get a much more real vitamin C effect in a potato, for instance. And one potato has enough vitamin C for an entire day.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. I see heated debates on Facebook about vitamin C, and some people are saying ascorbic acid is vitamin C, that's synonymous. And I'm of the belief that it's vitamin P and J and bioflavonoids, right? Like rutin, that are complex with it. Ascorbic acid is just a piece of vitamin C, right?
Exactly. And vitamin C also, according to O'Donnell Lay, is chelated iron. So that's why you also have to be careful of the type of vitamin C because it can overload the iron. And in iridology, and I'm talking about the German type, the American type is sort of inferior. It's kind of pop iridology. But the Germans, if you use a slit lamp, you'll see these little swarms of brown dots in people. And when you see it, it means the person is in problems. They're going to have congestive heart failure soon, their liver's failing, and it's iron overload.
Wow. So that's like an easy way to see it before even getting a test then.
Yes. In fact, long ago, when I was in the health food business, I warned people about too much iron because you would get it in a vitamin pill. They would get it separately. It would be in a protein powder. And pretty soon they're loaded. So this priest was coming in, and I kept warning him. So finally he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "You're anemic because you have too much iron." And that just boggled him. Now, this was before the time. Now you can get a lot of vitamins that don't have iron in them. At that time, you couldn't. So we had to arrange a plan, since he was big on vitamins, to take some of this, some of that, and he had to take about 10 pills at that time to get iron-free supplements.
Yeah, my neighbors take that, like an iron-free multi-mineral. Yeah.
And it's smarter because I know several people who have iron overloads. Then you have the other, where people have anemia out of Sicily, particularly our friends of mine. Now that will work with just plain old tomato juice and molasses, and you'll get it up, and it's a healthier type of iron. You don't have the type that you die from. And I've had friends that have died from iron overload, actually died. One was one of the greatest martial artists in the world, Jack Aber, and he died of iron overload.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm glad we're talking about iron because to me, this is the most overlooked. Like I think probably only 1% or less of the health community, like you and I are in that, they're actually talking about it, especially in the context of longevity, because what sugar gets blamed for is really PUFA and iron's fault, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
It's
iron
wild.
is a big killer, and PUFAs, of course. I've written 9 books on it now. So, I first heard about yellow fat disease from Ray Peat, and before that, because I studied Emmanuel Ravisi, he always said that if you took PUFAs over a certain amount of time, particularly hufas, the omega-3s, you would develop an adrenal response that would attack your body. So I already knew about that back in the early 90s. And I also, even in the health food business in the 80s, I was suspicious because, number one, I read that the Eskimos don't get heart disease because they don't even live to 40. That's why they don't get heart disease. So I was already suspicious about DHA. And back in the day when the popular book was Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw, Life Extension, they said, walk big circles around DHA. It's poison. They criticized PUFAs, like omega-6s, but they said omega-3s were worse of all. they were just poison, according to them. And you can go back and read the classic Life Extension for people who take a lot of supplements, and that's definitely written about.
Yeah, you've opened my eyes. You planted the seed, and then it took, I don't know, 2 or 3 years for the seed to sprout in my brain and say, "Wow, this makes sense. It's a real conspiracy. It's being suppressed for a reason." And I've been getting into Herbert Bailey's work. He wrote some old books, and my mom was telling me on the phone, like in the '70s, when vitamin E supplement. I don't know if you looked into this. When vitamin E supplements were big, uh, that went down, and fish oil industry skyrocketed like right after. And so it was interesting. Like they took the vitamin E and then they gave us fish oil and omega 3s. And you've written about vitamin E not being optimal, but it is kind of hard to get in food. And Dr. Shute, I guess he helped like over 20,000 people in Canada by giving them. He even said in the book, it was like people think there's a difference between synthetic and natural vitamins, but they both work the same. It's interesting. It's like a topic of debate, but I know there's a lot of probably placebo mental stuff involved as well. But
some of them work, and some of them are like, it's a difference between an artificial heart and a real heart. Now, artificial heart can keep you alive. You can't knock that, but you're always better off with a natural heart. And the supplements depend on how natural they are. As Ray Peters pointed out, the vitamin E they're producing today is not the same vitamin E they produced 20 years ago. Remember, he could make a liver turn purple by introducing a vitamin E into it, and now you can't do it. They're using, in fact, probably 90% of vitamins today, supplements, are actually nano-related. And you don't have to report that. See, GMO, when they say we're discontinuing GMO, that's a scam. That's over. They don't even use that anymore. The main thing they're using is nano. And you'll find it if you, the thing to do is get a hold of a nanotechnology textbook and then talk about opening your eyes to see where that stuff is. But they're not going to say it because they learned their lesson. When they told the public that they were going to introduce GMOs, they didn't expect such a huge feedback on it. And of course, books were written rapidly, several a year, about how bad GMOs are. So they introduced nano very quietly. And it's in many, many products now. Now, nano is in collagen and in milk and things like that, natural. But we're talking about totally synthetic nanos that they're building or creating now. Usually nanobacteria to actually create things like in NASA's program for their algae-formed DHA, EPA, etc. Yeah.
Wow. I have friends that are really into like micelle and liposomal. I think like Quicksilver has a whole line of those little things you squirt. And I took liposomal C and I just cut it all out because it's kind of freaky, right? When you're making something that small, purity it gets kind of sketchy, right?
Yeah. The question people should ask, and I've heard people rave about liposomal vitamin C, is why Quackwatch never comes down on it. They come down on all other vitamins. Why not? Because liposomal drugs are the hottest thing in pharmaceutical companies now. So they don't dare do that because it's in all the drugs people are taking, and they usually don't just tell you that it's in there because its delivery is greater. But it's like people say this makes water wetter. Do you really want your water wetter? You have to really think about these things. And people just say, oh, it must be greater. It's wetter or it's drier or whatever they're trying to sell you. And people should really investigate what is optimum is more important.
It's a good point. I think cooling water makes it wetter, right? It actually makes it more absorbable and it hydrates you better.
Hotter does.
Hotter? Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, the hotter you make it, in fact, you can... this is an interesting thing. There is actually a crystallization state of water as it approaches boiling, which was in the science magazines about 10 or so years ago. So there is a lot of information still to be produced because there's probably a cold exact temperature that can be measured. What I like about the British when they started measuring the carbon dioxide of the yogis that were being buried, the pakirs, is they went and measured all foods exactly to see the carbon dioxide values and the oxygen values. This was before the Civil War, and now they don't do that. There's no information on that unless you go way back into the old medical journals and scrounge through them, and then you can find all the foods. But it takes a lot of research, and that's what I've been doing lately.
Interesting.
For a long time.
Yeah, I have friends that are obsessed with water, and their philosophy is hot coffee irrigates the body, and cold brew coffee hydrates the cell. And I'm not sure, I haven't dived too deep into that, but I thought it was an interesting idea.
That's possible at different temperatures. In fact, cold water, if you want to build muscle mass, cold water works. And they tell you you lose weight with cold water. That's not true. You gain weight. In fact, I once told a bodybuilder about that. I told him to drink cold water and then do squats, and he gained 5 pounds with a 8-ounce glass of water. But the thing is, you can actually yawn and stretch and yawn that muscle mass away. What you're doing with most of the muscle mass they have now is holding the pump. You know, the pump when people work out and they swell up and they look in the mirror and say, holy cow, I look like Schwarzenegger. And then about half hour later, it's gone. Well, the trick is cold water is one of the things that helps hold the pump in the muscle. So then you walk around like that all day. It's kind of like muscle works very close to how our Mr. Happy works. It grows. Well, muscle can do the same thing, and you can hold blood and lymph and serum in the muscle.
So is it the cold kind of retains more nitric oxide? Is that the idea?
It could be nitric oxide and other things too, but nitric oxide can be useful, but if you take it as a supplement, you're getting into trouble. But in the body, it can be used in certain cold supercompensation. So yes, it probably does have a certain amount of benefit for bodybuilders. But when they take it, that's been shown to be carcinogenic, definitely. Ray Peat's gone into that more than I have, but I knew about that actually when I was bodybuilding back in the 80s mostly, and a little bit in the 90s. I took an arginine pill, which builds nitric oxide, and I put it in my mouth, and I went looking for a water fountain. And while it sat in my mouth, I actually burned a hole in my tongue. So then I talked to the Twin Lab salesman at the time, and he said, oh yeah, that is an amino acid that actually is acidic. Most of them aren't. They're either neutral or alkaline. But that one is acidic. I wouldn't be doing that. And I've always been of the, even when I was taking vitamins, I chewed them all. If it wasn't chewable, like betaine hydrochloride, I didn't take it. It had to be something that I could chew. Or put it in my soup.
Because I follow the whole vegan community, and a lot of them say meat's acidic, and they're probably coming from the philosophy that, oh, it's an amino acid. But what you said is fascinating, that most are neutral or alkaline, right?
Yep. Well, the protein will actually be acidic, but acidic is good. I wrote a whole book on that too called Alkalize or Die. And of course, it's a balance. But there was a ridiculous book called Alkalize or Die. And get this, the front cover shows a beautiful waterfall and trees and fir trees and pine trees and everything. That's supposed to be alkaline. Then it shows a dried up desert, and that's supposed to be acidic. Well, guess what? Alkali flats, alkali deserts. You go to the Salton Sea, it's as alkali as you're going to get because alkali rolls downhill. If you go up into the pine tree area, it's so acidic you can't even grow a lot of crops up there because all the acids come out of the pines. But the life force that a chef puts the lid on the pot is to keep the acids in, not the alkali. The alkali is the brakes. You need it to keep from getting cancer, but the youthing aspect of food is in the acidic portion. And Ribisi went into that in great detail, by the way. But if you don't have the brakes, you get cancer because that also is a growth factor. So use is a type of controlled cancer, and inflammation, and actually exercise is a type of controlled alkali.
It's so funny you said that because yesterday someone sent me an article. I'm obsessed with elk antler. I just think the mineral composition, it's a really interesting substance. And they sent me an article on how that growth of antler of either deer or elk is controlled cancer. Like it's actually a cancer growth of that bone, but it's very tightly regulated by the elk and deer. It's kind of cool.
Cancer is actually an evil twin. It's a pregnancy. In fact, many times if you look closely, inside the tumors you'll find hair, even teeth, and all kinds of things. This was brought out by John Beard. But when Kelly and Gonzalez got onto that, they missed that part. They misinterpreted what John Beard said. He was a gynecologist, and endocrinologist. He studied fish and all kinds of other things. And that's when he found out that cancer was actually an evil twin.
That's so funny. Sorry, just filling up more coffee here, which I'm sure we'll talk about. What do you think about? I have two friends that are obsessed with the jacuzzi, and I'm probably going to get into it at some point. But soaking in a jacuzzi when it's maybe snowing outside, or there's that temperature difference of like being in hot water and then half the body in the cold. Do you think that increases circulation?
Yes, it does. Now, we used to do it the other way. We soaked in a hot tub, then jumped in a cold pool, and soaked it. I've been out in the snow doing that before, hot and cold, because that definitely jogs the circulation. Now, if a person has a weak heart or something, they might be careful doing that. But a healthy person, it's actually very beneficial. Cold and hot, look at Jack LaLanne. The guy went into the ice-cold bathtub. There's something to that. But he did it so that he could swim and in the water of Alcatraz. And, I think at one time he pulled, 89 boats with his teeth with passengers aboard. This guy was a superman, Dr. Lane. He always said, I'm not going to wear, what did he say? I'm not going to rust away, I'm going to wear away. And he did. He lasted into his 90s.
That's really cool. Do you think because everyone's into cryotherapy, going to those places, and then everyone's buying like a chest freezer now, that's a big fad kind of thing, and also sauna therapy, which has been around for a while, but do you think these extreme temperatures should be avoided if someone's been keto or fasting and their thyroid is kind of suppressed? Because it's a stress, right? Both of those.
Yeah, they are stressed, so you have to be careful. It's just like so many people go out and shovel snow and then they drop over dead, and that's because of their diet mainly. Omega-3s. Omega-3s are out of Ashley Aubrey de Grey's 7 Deadly Sins of Aging. There's 2 of them, and probably the third, the so-called ages or browning to death. Actually, that has a lot to do with protein fragments and with lipid fragments, and very little with glycation. And of course, glycation is in the name, so people think, it's the sugar doing it. And no, it's actually the protein and the lipids are doing more damage. According to Aubrey de Grey, in his page 173 of his Ending Ages, it can be as much as 40,000 times more damage than uncontrolled diabetes. It's right there in his book. But then, since he wrote that book, the keto diet is so political now that he doesn't dare to take a stand on it anymore. But it's right there in his book for anyone that wants to read that. And some people who have had second thoughts about lipids and about certain protein fragments.
Wow. Yeah. And on the topic of longevity, we talked about iron a little bit, and we'll probably get deeper into that. But iron and omega-3s, that's just nobody's looking at those, right? And everyone's trying to restrict sugar, and then they're on a PUFA diet, right? And just eating all these nuts and seeds and all these little infographics I see of health, like doctors and stuff. They'll say, just a handful of almonds every day, or cashews and chia seeds and all these heart healthy fats. Yeah. But I think really the education is teaching people that they're unstable, so they could be perfectly preserved outside the body, but when they go in, they go rancid immediately, right?
Definitely. A lot of times the organs will be almost totally gone in a person that looks pretty good outside. We tend to, in yoga, they have exercises for the inner organs. Our exercise programs usually don't take that into consideration. And, a bicep is easy to see, but a bicep ties into heart health too. So all of those in what's called Chapman Reflexes that ended up as neurolymphatic points in applied kinesiology, those have inner and outer combinations. So They make a difference.
Wow.
It,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's a funny thing. We have a friend in Santa Barbara here, and he's had back problems for years. And so just a few weekends ago, I thought it could be from the neurolymphatics, the Chapman reflexes in his back. So he had all these calcified lumps back there. So I said, that's your problem. So anyway, the next week we come by, and he's like, I got to talk to you. I've been telling everybody. I'm super healthy. I can surf now. I can run. I can jog. Things I haven't been able to do in years. I've been to chiropractors. I've been to all these people. And all I do is I got a lacrosse ball, and I went up against the wall and rubbed that ball up there and rubbed those things out. And now, anyway, the lacrosse ball fad seems to be starting in Santa Barbara, and I seem to have been at the epicenter of it because he's telling everybody to go and work those Chapman reflexes out.
Wow, that's a really affordable way to do it. I've heard of that, or like even a tennis ball, or I guess
ball.
It's the same. Because I use the inversion swing, and then I have a back stretcher, and then I have like a foam roller that vibrates. But you can do it very affordably with. I guess that ball is a good start, right?
Back stretching is very good. There's a company called Spindex that has a very imaginative type. It actually stretches your spine according to a logarithmic rhythm, so your brain can't follow it. And it has, and people who need surgeries for spinal damage, they get cured on that company. I've toured the company in. Let's see, they have one in Tucson. I toured the one in Scottsdale. Interesting concept. But just plain stretching the spine and doing some of the Qigong exercises where you just sit and get taller and taller and taller for an hour. And pretty soon you find, wow, I'm an inch taller than I was when I started an hour ago.
That's pretty cool. I think that's the flip side to like spinal health and all of these accumulations. Like from my research, it's like calcification, lipofuscin, and then scar tissue that kind of forms from the inflammation and these buildups. And then if you kind of take care of those while you're getting manual therapy and maybe have your partner work on you and walk on you, right, and mashing and different things, you need that manual, right, to kind of break up the accumulations.
Yeah, anytime there's pain, there's inflammation, and we have more of that now. There's two ways to die: paralysis, and that's being too acidic, and inflammation, which is being too alkaline. And right now, obviously, all the people seeking pain pills, obviously, we have an epidemic of inflammation going on.
Interesting.
And many people, though, I've seen one time I saw someone said they wanted the Tylenol. And someone else said, oh, give me one of those too. Like they're candy, you know? And these things are actually been responsible, according to Time and Forbes magazine, for 50% of all liver failures in the U.S. That's right, in Time and Forbes. Now, 50% because 25% of those are suicides. It's the most popular form of suicide in the U.S. But 25% are from just popping them in your mouth for pain. And I actually worked on someone in El Paso that went in and got a Tylenol in an emergency ward. They went in just with the flu, and they ended up having seizures for a long time.
Jeez. Yeah, I know Ray talks a lot about aspirin, and we've kind of brought it up the last two shows. And I think, people use that for pain, but I think systemic enzymes are better. Like I sell a plastic-free system, like nattokinase and serrapeptase, and those are really interesting because they go through and dissolve the fibrosis.
I'm definitely suspicious of all NSAIDs, even aspirin. I took my last aspirin in 1958, so obviously I'm not. Also, all pain control, if they were going to do pain control with less side effects, morphine, strangely enough, not fentanyl, all these drugs that are like 200 times. People aren't dying from morphine therapeutically or heroin even therapeutically. They're dying from fentanyl and all these synthetics. And in fact, there have been many people who have lived on morphine for 30, 40 years, surgeons even, but a controlled amount. When you're out in the street, you don't know if you're getting this much or that much. So that's why people die of it. But morphine and the opioids, the real opioids, have the less side effects of any other drug, including marijuana, whatever you name. The other ones that cause everything from cirrhosis, on and on. Yeah.
Weren't they used during World War One a lot? Like I'm always fascinated by the wartime things that were related to health. There's so much that happened in World War One and World War Two.
They were. If you use them in exact amounts, they're very beneficial. But of course, that's
Mhm.
not what happens on the street. And now it's all fentanyl and
Mhm.
chemicals even more powerful. It's all these synthetic chemicals that they make big money on. You can't make money on heroin basically, except the people who grow it. You know, the opium
Right.
poppy. And all
It's all
we're
on that.
hearing about that is incorrect anyway, because supposedly it's all coming from Afghanistan. That's nonsense. It's grown all over the world, China, you name it, South America. In between the cocoa plants, they grow it. Yeah.
Probably mostly sold by the CIA, right?
Often they're in business with it. You bet. To this day. That's been
Very
pretty well
profitable.
done. Even in the movies, people know about that. You know, look at Mena, Arkansas, et cetera, et cetera.
So kind of jumping topics because I have so many things I want to talk about. I just have a bunch of different categories here that I think about when I think of longevity. And one that's overlooked to me is air. And that's why, like, I live in a cabin and I've lived in a cabin for most of the last 2 years. And uh, I think, like, elevation, being around a lot of trees, and if you're indoors, having some type of an air filtration, or at the very least, just keeping the windows open, right? But the air quality, I feel like the synthetic VOCs and stuff that can kind of harm the organs over time.
You know, they're a lot less than Ronald Reagan told us. When lived in East Texas, we actually called and asked why there were so many VOCs in East Texas now, and it was all drifting over from Dallas. Well, they said, "Oh, it's the trees," and the new trees they plant are higher in it. Old forest doesn't have many VOCs at all, and they're actually planting more trees that have VOCs. But the main problem is coming from industry. It's not coming from the trees. So you're much better off. In fact, when I was hearing all of that, we took a trip up to Flagstaff. The air is so fresh and clean and everything. Then we go down to El Paso. It doesn't even have trees. Danger, ozone, 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 and all that. And supposedly the ozone is supposed to be coming from the trees. Well, not in El Paso, but why are they having ozone warnings there and no ozones in Flagstaff? So you're in a good place, trees and all.
Interesting. Yeah, and I'm fascinated by the terpenes too. People think of cannabis when they think of that, but the pinene and these unique compounds that the trees release are really cool.
They're part of essential oils. You know, my
Mhm.
co-author of Yes No Maybe, she's big into essential oils, so I learned a lot about those from her, and they definitely work. Kurt Snowball probably is the world expert on terpenes and triterpenes and all the other combinations of them.
That's cool. Yeah, I take reishi, and there's like reishi spore oil, which is fascinating. I actually meant to share this with you. It's like 50% oleic acid, and then I think 17% omega 6. It's like very,
Excellent.
very minimal omega 3. So it's kind of cool. And I found a study on oleic acid is actually beneficial for the liver detoxifying PUFA. It was just one study, but I thought it was kind of cool.
If we were
Interesting.
able to avoid all other oils, our body, that's all it makes is oleic acid. Then from that, it proceeds and makes other acids as needed. And apparently DHA and EPA aren't on the menu, and neither are ALA, but stearic acid and others are, you know. But yeah, we make oleic acid if we ate no meat whatsoever. That's what we make. Ray Peter's gone into that in detail too.
That's awesome. Yeah, because we can make saturated fat from sugar, right?
We can. In fact, we make it indirectly. We make oleic acid from sugar, and from
Okay.
that we make our saturated fat. But that's it. Most of our fat stores are in oleic acid. Well, we see a fat on our body, you're seeing oleic acid, except in a toxic society where you're getting that, what do you call it? The crinkled fat, looks like orange peel fat, cellulite. That actually is, you're getting omega-3s, hormones, and other things in it. Obviously, estrogen is involved because men don't get that fat nearly as much as women do. And what do? They kill women by telling them they need estrogen. And men get a free pass. They don't take estrogen, and how come they don't lose calcium? How come the women who are taking the estrogen are losing the bone mass?
It's a good question. What a question I had for you is how to detoxify hufas and omega-3s. It's kind of a broad question, I guess, but I get that a lot. Like I start talking about, you know, PUFAs and people are like, how do I get them out of my body? And they're freaking out. And I kind of recommend it just regulating your blood sugar with protein and carbs in every meal, and then having saturated fat to kind of displace it and just get the liver functioning and lower stress. You kind of agree with those points or?
Displacing it definitely works, and some of it. The problem is it preferentially burns some of that, so you're kind of stuck with it. But as Ray Pete has pointed out, if you ate no hufas or pufas at all, you would get rid of them all within 4 years. And that's a pretty amazing statement. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to take sweet fruit, honey, your high sugar foods like tomatoes, and bingo, you get rid of a lot of it. You speed up the process that way. So it does go away, but it sometimes takes people 60 years to get that in. They can't just expect it to be out in a month like they're going to do. I'm going to do a cleanse now, a liver cleanse, and I'll get rid of all of these just like that. When you've been shoving it in your mouth and it's been building your structure, It's like taking a bodybuilder and taking all their muscles away and rebuilding it. It's similar to that.
Interesting. Yeah, and I'm fascinated by the liver and its role in this process. I think it's called glucuronidation, and there's just that relationship with iron because iron accumulates there, and then you need vitamin A in the liver, right? And copper, like those accumulate in the liver and help it function if it's in balance, right?
Definitely. They used to cure when they called vitamin when they had iron anemia. They actually cured it with arsenic because it stimulated the blood cell production without any iron needed. And then the other way they did it, just going out in the sun, automatically stimulates iron production. So chlorosis, they would take these young women who were dressed in the Victorian age with hats and bonnets and everything up in the neck, and they would tell them to get out in the sun. And then that would cure their anemia. The correct way, because putting heavy iron in your body, there's different types of iron, you get into problems. And it's more than just the ferric and the ferrous type of irons. There's actually other irons that scientists don't acknowledge that have what you call vital force. They don't acknowledge vital force. That's, no, we're robots. It's all mechanical. There's no, we're put together like a machine from little pieces up. There's no field effect. Nope, no vital force.
I love it. Yeah, copper, this might be a little different, but there's like copper 2, 3, 4. There's like different numbers for a lot of these minerals too, right? So it's like so complex when you get into minerals. Like when you're supplementing, you're taking one specific thing, right? Like structure.
Some of that actually follows circadian rhythms because your trees tend to have one type of copper, your vines and your grasses have another type of copper, and your roots and your seafood tend to have another type of copper. You won't find that as 100% because plants over thousands and thousands, millions of years have done different changes, There's a big difference between a bonsai orange tree and a regular orange tree. So they're going to have many things in common with growth pattern, but some things are going to deviate after a while.
Wow. Is that like different varieties of orange? Like I've been juicing, I think Valencias, but are you saying like Valencias and Navels will have different?
They can actually have differences too, but mostly you're getting, oranges are one of the best things you can do. In fact, Ray Pete did one thing for me really good. I was taking vitamin C before, and I would have problems. In fact, I started to have the beginnings of gum disease, and if I would bite into like a white fruit, I would see a little tracings of blood. And also, if I would get on the toilet to wipe my butt, I had to be really gentle with it. Well, vitamin C didn't do anything. But when I started the oranges on a regular basis, now I could sandpaper my butt. and it doesn't seem to matter what I bite into. It doesn't cause my gums to bleed. So a lot of that is just caused by the wrong type of vitamin C. A strong argument against the other. Now, Ray Pete says if you take a small amount of the regular ascorbic acid, it will turn metabolic. But if you go overboard, then it makes iron very toxic and everything else. But otherwise, small amounts of the pill form, if you can't get a sweet fruit anyplace or an orange, they will actually detoxify mercury and things like that. But the limit to him was like 25 milligrams, I believe. It's pretty low compared to 500 and 5,000 and Linus Pauling's 9,000 and whatever else they were taking.
That's cool. I've been obsessed with berries, and I'm sure you've looked into it. But where I'm moving, there's a lot of huckleberries and elderberries to forage. I'm super excited, and I've been taking capsulated. I know it's better to taste. I should probably open them in my mouth, but encapsulated elderberry and camu camu from good companies, and just to supplement vitamin C. But I tend to do a full mason jar, 32 ounces a day of fresh squeezed OJ. And one question I had for you is teeth sensitivity. I just interviewed my keto friend. He's like on the carnivore diet, but he does some animal carbs like milk and honey and stuff. But he was saying he tried some citrus, just I think a mandarin. He just ate it, and he said immediately his teeth got sensitive. Do you know why that would be? Is it partially psychosomatic, or because he's getting tons of fat soluble vitamins? That's like his whole diet. So I was kind of wondering why.
It can be that way, but sometimes people's teeth need certain minerals to buffer that. And one of the things that Adonal Lay used to have us take for that is by, used to be Body Toddy, but the original form is T.J. Clark's minerals, coming from shale and things like that. And so he would say, you hold it in your mouth for 15 minutes at a time. And some people, it did differ. Some people were in agony with that. I never seemed to have that much of a problem, so I had a different mineral distribution than other people. But it was remarkable how some people would be in extreme pain and couldn't even do it. They had to work themselves up to it. One friend of mine who had teeth problems, he kept working himself up to it, and then he had a lot less dental appointments. So there's a lot of unfactored in cases, but it's some kind of a mineral, some mineral that's probably he's not getting, some trace element, and could be anything, but yeah. So it could be real. It might not just be in his head.
Yeah, for sure. I think like K2, especially in the MK7 form that's found in like natto and blue cheese, that magnesium and calcium, because I've actually used just high dose K2. I think I was doing like 500 micrograms a day, and I had like a sore jaw for 3 weeks, and then just by taking a lot, like twice a day, completely, I think I healed a cavity just with K2 alone. But I know calcium, magnesium, and K2 kind of work together for the bone health.
Yeah, they used to say too, you could just hold calcium in your mouth and it would actually work on the teeth. The other thing is there's evidence that NASA supported this. Donald Lay used to recommend that we, at 6:15 p.m. exactly, we would take either Monterey Jack, Swiss cheese, or sharp cheddar, and chew it and hold it in our mouth with garlic, a little bit of garlic and a little bit of red onion. And then we would hold it as long as we could, and it would replate the teeth. And I actually have a friend that went to the dentist, and the cavity was gone too, besides replating the teeth. Because I wondered up till then, well, what if you plate over a cavity, But anyway, wow. NASA validated that they listed 4 chemicals that were, what did they call it, karyogenic. They actually rebuilt enamel. And it was cheddar cheese, sharp cheddar cheese, Monterey Jack, what's the third one, Swiss cheese. And they didn't mention the other parts, but the other one was, what is it called, what do they take? They put it in a lot of toothpaste and things like that now.
Is it charcoal? Or?
No, I can't think of it.
Earth?
You actually get it from waste forest products is where they get it. So I'm not a big fan. It gives you chewing gum diarrhea. What'd you say? Xylitol. That's it. Yeah,
the sweetener.
Xylitol.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've seen that in gum. Yeah.
Totally GMO. Totally GMO. And see, to me, I used to chew gum because it's good as a cerebral pump, but now I can't even get chewing gum except designer chewing gum at about 10 times the price. They don't even have it anymore. It's all artificial. Go to the drugstore or even the health food store and try to find a chewing gum with sugar in it anymore. And sugar, as Dr. Phillips of the Blotting Brush pointed out, it doesn't cause tooth decay. Only if it stays on your teeth for 10 hours. I think the average person, 10 hours. Now, guess what stays on your teeth? Crackers and starches. You see how it accumulates? Breads. But sugar, right down the food hole. It's not going to cause any kind of cavities. They've got that backwards too.
So like with like fruit, honey, maple syrup, these are things you should kind of clean your mouth after eating, maybe? Or
Yeah, actually, your mouth is the cleanest, or the cleanest after you eat, if you eat the right things. But notice, you'll eat a potato. You're not going to have much of that accumulation on your teeth, but eat bread or grains and see what happens. It's interesting. No one asked that. And when you're seeing that accumulation on the teeth, it's very much like to get the same thing, take a bandage and wrap it around your finger for a week and watch all that pussy type stuff. That's what you're getting up there. And that's all from the bacteria that grows. It's the same principle. I learned that from Dr. Phillips decades ago.
Interesting. And kind of going back to the light, I made a few notes. I'm sure like infrared light, I think I read an article years ago on how that actually, penetrates, I think it's like 6 inches or something crazy to the bone, but it actually has an effect on the bones, right? And so I always stand in front of my LED, the red light, and I know there's a little debate about, the source of red light, but I've interviewed Morley Robbins 3 times in my podcast, and one of the most interesting things to me about red light is he said it acts as a copper replacement. So when you have iron overload or poisoning, and then you get red light, it actually acts as like a surrogate for copper if you don't have copper, because it acts, cytochrome C oxidase. It's like red light is literally a replacement for copper to make the cell work. It's kind of cool.
Ray Pete has similar ideas. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, the best place to get red light is sunrise and sunset. We don't realize that we have such color compensation in our eyes that when we're out there at dawn, if you could see it as it actually was, it'd be bright red all over the place. The only trace we have of that, you turn behind, you see a green shadow. How did a green shadow get there? Because our eyes don't get fooled by the other, but don't get fooled by the green shadow. So in other words, if you get up at dawn, you have red light. If you wait a couple hours, it turns orange, and then it turns yellowish. And by the time you're at 12 noon, you're at maximum blue light. And you need blue light for timing. Noon is an important time to actually time your body with, as well as sunrise and sunset for circadian rhythms. They do that by adjusting before sunsets, and I think the University of Portland figured all that out for jet travelers, and there's a lot of validity to it.
Interesting. Okay, cool. I love it. Let's see what else. I wanted to talk about elevation. Like I think we might have mentioned it in the previous talks, but the higher you go up, the more carbon dioxide you retain, and that's a huge part for longevity, right? Like what you eat actually matters less, from what I've researched. It's interesting.
It is. In fact, when they talk about prana, it's your outward breath. That's all it is. They want to make some big thing about it. And if you breathe it out, you die. If you hold it in, you live. So the more prana you can retain, and of course that's the Buteyko diet is a new version of what George Catlin, the Indian artist, wrote about, that he learned from all the Indian tribes, knew how to keep the mouth closed and do very slow breathing. And in India, again, some of these fakirs could be buried for 40 days. And actually, there's cases of even longer. But the British, in 25 years of occupation in India, they documented 3 cases, only 3 legitimate cases. They buried them themselves and had guards and sentries there, and they lasted for 40 days. And a British colonel actually learned to do the technique. 2 types of samadhi. One, you hold your breath and you drop over dead, and you tell the person, don't bury the body, I'll be back in 12 hours. The other type, you have to be revived. In other words, it takes about 4 or 5 hours to revive these people when they dig them out of the ground, and they've been in there for 40 days. I used to think that was a legend, but I've seen the British medical records. They have records all over the internet for anyone that wants to look at it. And when I start talking about that, they think, wow, that guy's crazy. You can't hold your breath for that long. Well, the British were so fascinated because the longest they could hold it was 100 seconds. So they started measuring all the carbon dioxide ratios of every action you did, moving a right arm versus a left arm, what food you took, and turns out the most conserving of all was ass's milk, donkey's milk. That is what all yogis would use, donkey's milk, not cow's milk, but donkey's milk, to do their burial technique.
Interesting. Wow. I've been kind of ruminating on the relationship between body temperature, metabolism, and then CO2 and oxygen, because there's like a deep interrelationship there, right? And I know like I carbonate water and I'll cool it first before I carbonate it. Then I make my own magnesium bicarbonate. And it's interesting that cold water holds ozone and CO2 longer. But there's all these beliefs about like Ray Peat says your body temperature should be not feverish, but higher, right? Whereas the keto people say you should run at a colder temperature for longevity. It's kind of interesting.
Ray Peat kind of has mixtures on that. He admits that if you have a very healthy body, you can go at a lower temperature. And there's actually two ways to deal with that. Carnivores that live long basically meditate, like a crocodile. But carnivores that move a lot, look at a lion in captivity, only 20 years. A leopard, 21, a cheetah, 22, the most. And that's, we're talking about in captivity where they have the finest care they can get. Now, a bear will live 44 years, but guess what? 90% plant life. And a grizzly, we don't think about that. Well, they're out there eating salmon. Oh, no, they're not. They eat carrion. When they come out of hibernation, they see dead animals lying around that didn't know how to hibernate, so they go and eat them until the tree leaves grow and the sedges grow and the grasses grow down by the water, and then they have sharp, long claws that they go in and get these starchy roots too. So people have a totally wrong idea about bears. And bears also live long because they hibernate, and that's why a meat eater like the crocodile can live to over 100, because they meditate. They don't run around. You have a cheetah in a cage, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You don't see an alligator doing that. They just sit there when they're in captivity. And that's the difference. If you're going to move, you better have a meditation technique like one of the fastest movers in the animal world is the hummingbird. It zips all over the place, but it estivates. It actually goes into a type of hibernation, so it outlives the other birds that don't fly as fast or act as fast. A small bird like that should not last as long. And I think it lasts about 10 times as long as a regular bird.
Wow. And so with hibernation, there's increase in serotonin, the stress hormone, but there's the other hormones that kind of balance it, right?
You not only balance it, but you recycle your muscle tissue. You break them down into amino acid, into toxic uric acid, and what does the bear do? Build it back into muscle. And human beings can do that too. Yogis have figured out to do it. We actually have genes for it in the pancreas. That's why anyone who has cancer, you will find a problem in the pancreas first. In fact, diabetes is a cure for cancer. It keeps cancer from coming, as arthritis. Many types of arthritis, you cure arthritis the incorrect way, you get cancer. Because cancer is not a disease, it's actually a life extension device, as Koch. Pete's hero, Dr. Koch, William Koch, that's what he says. I haven't heard Pete talk about that, but he says that cancer is actually a cure for all the other diseases, except we let it out of control and don't know how to utilize it. And he claimed he did know how to, and I think he was onto something. Obviously, he had to escape to a foreign country because he was on a hit list, he said, anyway.
That's pretty common, I think. So, yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you brought up the pancreas, because that's an area that's really overlooked, I think, in longevity. And it's my understanding that the pancreas really likes the bicarbonate ion, and it really likes sugar, right? And it doesn't like PUFA because that damages the beta cells.
You know, a friend of mine had AIDS and ended up at Dr. Revisi's in New York while Dr. Revisi was still alive. Well, one of the doctors there, she had, and I found actually a tendency in iridology, you can see a tendency towards pancreatitis. Well, she had it. Well, she had a pancreatic attack. They gave her a list of drugs. The doctor told her all you needed to do was take a heaping tablespoon of white sugar and it would have stopped just like that. So yeah, so white sugar has been one of the most hidden cures for various things. It's a medicine. You shouldn't go taking bunches of it every day, perhaps. At least white sugar, like I have done. But if I have any kind of infection or flu's around, I just wolf down the white sugar.
That's
Honey
awesome.
or maple syrup would work too, but white sugar is easier. At night, you wake up, you just take a little bit in your mouth. And a friend of mine, every time he gets up to go to the bathroom, he takes a sugar cube. Really convenient. Before he gets out of bed, he just puts it in his mouth while he's getting up to go to the bathroom.
On that topic, I had a friend reach out and said they get nightmares often. Do you know what's the cause of that?
Yeah, it's actually a beginning meditation technique. It's there's two types. There's nightmares and night stallions. And they're actually, one occurs in a theta brainwave level and one occurs in a delta brainwave level. And the one in the delta can actually injure your flesh. Did you see the movie Golden Child with Eddie Murphy?
I haven't, no.
It's an interesting movie, but there's a point where he has a dream and someone's coming at him with a knife and he wakes up with a wound on his body. That's called a night stallion.
That's happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah, you can actually have those. It's happened to me too. So those states of consciousness, it's hard for us to explain. They investigated them a lot. Elmer Green out of, I believe it was the Menninger Foundation. I think it was the Menninger Foundation, but he did a lot of investigations of yogis. He became fascinated with how the brain can control your own body. And he took like sixth graders and could train them to use their brain waves to control blood pressure and things like that within a matter of hours. He had a doctor friend that it took him like 10 months to do. And the doctor said, how come they're learning it so quickly and it takes me this long? And Elmer Green said, because you're a doctor.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we get brainwashed so much by our school system that you can't do this and you can't do that, and pretty soon it becomes layer on layer of affirmation, and it interferes with our consciousness. Animals get stuck with that. Like, I had a dog, a dachshund, and my half-brother threw a cherry bomb. Ever after that, that dog was terrified of a backfire of a car. 4th of July was a nightmare. But animal trainers know when that happens, their animal is ruined. Human beings have the ability to get past that because they have terrific traumas. But you can't just do brain tapping or move your eyes a certain way to get it. Sorry about that, Bruce Lipton, but it's not that simple. You have to really work at it. It's actually work. And it's well worth it because you can get rid of those traumas. I had a lady, you probably heard this story, that came to me with a fatal disease. I choose to remember what it was, but she was dying. And it turned out, during the session, she remembered that she was raped by her father repeatedly and had a child, and an abortion, and repressed it. She had no memory of it till that day. Well, she lived another 8 years after that, and she was supposed to die. She was supposed to die within a month. That's why she was seeing me. So
wow.
Trauma is a big thing. Gabor Mate goes into that in great detail, and there's many other people who have gone into the... you have to address psychological and social psychological traumas as well as physiological traumas.
That's a good point. Yeah, because I share a lot about stress, and I've gotten a lot of that from Ray Pete, but just over the last like 10 years or whatever of studying. And when people think of stress, they think of inflammation from diet and air and water and EMFs. But really the start for stress should be like being alone, right? Like it's really important to have a partner or be close with your family. Like I call my mom very often, and that's one of the biggest de-stressors, right? Is to have people you love next to you that you can kind of communicate with and give hugs often and all that stuff, right?
Extremely important, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When people are... now, yogis can get away with it. but they learn to find companionship within themselves. But most people don't know how to do that. And one of the things, when we're born enlightened. Both hemispheres are fired. But then we forget about that. The ultimate marriage is when the child is born and both hemispheres come together. After that, people go seeking that type of relationship the rest of their life. And believe me, after 5 wives, I've had my share of problems in that department. It took me a long time to figure out what I was looking for was an illusion.
Interesting. Yeah. I think it's that old thing that's pretty accurate. Like, you can't be a half looking for another half to create a whole, right? You have to like have the self-love going on. And I mean, I take self-care to the extreme. So
Definitely.
it's,
And not
yeah.
that we definitely need people, but when we get affixed to one person, I had a lady once had a trauma like that with her shoulder. And I told her it was because, well, her partner had found out that she had an affair with her business partner. They had a prosperous business. He told his wife. So she had this shoulder because she wanted, with her right shoulder, she wanted to hit the partner. So I told her that's what it was, and you're going to have to address that before you can do anything physical. Well, I went to Germany, and this lady gave my arm a tremendous yank and fixed it. Then I said, "Why are you seeing me?" "Oh, yeah." And said, "I bet as soon as you came back to the office, it came back, right?" "Yes, it did." So she never let that go. And so, but I asked her, if you were born in Iceland, you'd have a different person that you would be attracted to. If you were in South America, another person. Why an attractive woman like you with lots of money, why are you drawn to a married man? Think about it.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. So you just released a book on mesmerism, right? The craziest thing I've ever done is I used a ultrasonic device with 2 electrodes on my forehead, and this is when I was living with my parents. And I put a little iPod, one of those little cheap iPods, and I loaded onto it subliminal messages. It's like I would play on repeat for 8 hours while I slept. I think it worked because I was doing like prosperity money things. I was like broke at the time, working 3 jobs, very like always stressed because I was like just getting by. And I started making more money very quickly, like within a year from doing that. So I think it works to like reprogram the brain. There's different ways to do it, right?
I know it works. In fact, my friend Greg Whiteley, who I mentioned before the show started, he actually has taken affirmations to an amazing place. For how many years now? Golly, for 30 years at least, he's written affirmations every day. And his whole life changed from poverty to lots of wealth. He lives the life of that people dream of living. And he knows to keep under the radar. He makes enough money to do what he needs to do, and now he's up in Sandpoint. He's a farmer up there, and they make so much tomatoes and berries and things like that that during the winter he goes back to Austin, and he has enough that they produce up there to live the entire winter in Austin. That's how much they make.
That's funny. And I'm curious because I've heard this thing with relationships, like you might have even brought it up. I can't remember, but the ratio of like arguments to compliments and like in a partnership. And if you just have a partner that's constantly saying positive comments, and that's a form of affirmation, right?
It is definitely. Definitely. I attempted several times. I did Greg Whiteley's affirmations, and one of the most remarkable times, he flew me up to Idaho, to Sandpoint. Actually, we're working up there, clearing the land for his some buildings he's putting up. So anyway, I told him, "I'm going to do your affirmations this time." He said, "Yeah, I've heard that before." I said, "No, this time I really am going to do it." And I was getting to a point where I was just about completely out of money. One more withdrawal from the bank, I would have had to clear my entire rent out to pay the rent. So anyway, I'm writing these affirmations as per instructions from them. And it goes on, and the day of the rent is due. The day before comes, and I'm just saying, I'm just going to do this and see what happens. Believe it or not, a Swami calls me from Hollywood and says, "I must see you." And I said, "Well, I'm in, sure." He said, "Where are you?" "I'm in Tucson." "Well, I'm in Hollywood. How do I get there?" "Well, by plane or by train, I guess." "Let me call you back." Said, I'll be in on the 9:15 plane. So he came in on the 9:15 plane. We picked him up. I worked on him all night. He paid me an hourly rate where I had several $1,000s in my hand. And I said, well, you want to stay for the night? No, I have to go back to Hollywood. Call me a cab. So he left, and I had thousands of dollars. Then he came back with his devotees, and I had more money. So I had like about $5,000 or $6,000 within a month. Suddenly, just appeared. And so affirmations work. They worked for me before quite dramatically.
That's super cool. Yeah.
Now you do have to be careful. I'll give you a warning. When the what the bleep and those movies were on, where you can do these affirmations, a lady that was cleaning the ranch that I was staying on in Texas had seen that, and I said, I just did, and I did an affirmation saying I get paid just for breathing, misinterpreting the affirmation that Greg Whiteley had given me, and guess what? I got, believe it or not, $15,000 or $16,000 check in the mail. Totally unexpected. I almost fell over. 2 days after I'm doing the affirmation. So I'm bragging to her about that, and she leaves. Well, it turns out that she has to be rescued by the fire department. And Greg calls me shortly thereafter and says, because I was bragging about it, frankly, that I got that much money. He says, you're an old yogi. You can get away with some of that stuff. But do you know that some people would rather stop breathing than collect the money? And I said, oh my God, that's what happened. Her lungs shut down, and the fire department had to rescue her and take her to the hospital. So now I'm really, really careful about when people do affirmative work. It's garbage in, garbage out. They have to be really careful about how they do that. But anyway, I cruised for years on that $15,000 that I got in that check that time.
That's so funny. Wow, I have close friends that are filmmakers, and he was writing a script, and part of the script started to come into his life, like actually people he was meeting that were like acting like the characters in the script he was writing. It was really interesting, but really weird situations. But kind of jumping topics, I want to talk about dehydration, because I feel just like accumulation of lipofuscin and these different things. Also, as we age, we tend to have water loss, right? And not only in our cell, but in our spine, which I'm really fascinated by. And I guess our spine gets less cushiony, right? The vertebrae lose water, and stretching is a way to, it's my understanding, stretching is a way to allow water to go back into those cushions so that it's healthier.
I had a friend of mine named King Kahani, who isn't a legitimate chiropractor, but he was taught by a chiropractor. So when we were up in Bellingham, Washington, he worked on me every other day, and he loosened all of my vertebrae and euthanized my spine over 3 months, where it was very soft. I've worked on some people, you do a drop, and their vertebrae goes. Some of them will go like a machine gun. Others, you can pull as hard as you can. They're fused. And that actually is calcification, and it's the Crohn's disease. I mean, people get old prematurely before their time. So there is a big difference between biological age and chronological age, huge difference in people. And the spine is one of the first things to suffer. Yeah. Keep
Interesting. What do you think about, like, I remember in like junior high and high school, I would stretch my fingers back, you just kind of put pressure, and they would crack so easily. I remember even my wrist, I could make a really loud popping sound that someone could hear across the room. That's calcification, right? Because I can't do that anymore. I don't hear any popping or...
Yeah, after a while, you have to do it regularly. Now, if you twist it, you damage the joint. The bursa will actually break. But as long as you go straight or down or up and not circular, it's actually very beneficial. I used to do it all the time, and I also used to do a kick to the side and adjust my spine. That chiropractors, oh no, you're going to damage yourself, which is a bunch of nonsense, actually. I deliberately kicked extra hard to try and put it out. Couldn't do it. If it goes out, you have a psychological problem, and Dr. John Sarno has covered that in detail in 3 or 4 or 5 books, including an audio book on YouTube.
Interesting. Sleep is a big part of longevity, and there's so many different opinions on it. And I think what's often missing from the conversation is how darkness is a stress, but if we get really deep sleep, then we kind of neutralize that stress, right?
It depends. If you go, there's two ways of longevity. If you're doing the yoga way, they went in burrows like bears, and they only came out to eat at night. They never saw the light of sun. And like Huguette Clark, in a hospital all that time, lived long. And there's been many cases of people, including the saints, they lived on bread and water, just bread and water, no minerals, no vitamins, for 120, 130 even, and most of them became centenarians. Now that's the yoga way, but it's a very restricted way, and your diet is so restricted that quality of life comes in. So you can do it the other way. It just takes meditation like a hummingbird and various techniques to do. But yeah, the sunshine and the exercise and things like that is the most practical way. And the yoga way is something that people can do if they wish. And some people do choose to do it.
Do you think Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that in that case, the nighttime is not a stress, the darkness, because they've learned to deal with it. But with a certain diet, indeed, it is a stress, and most people are not on a yogic diet, anything far from it. So it is a stress to them.
Interesting, because I eat quite a bit of red meat, and my body just thrives on it. Like the difference when I'm not eating it, everything just functions worse. when I eat grass-fed beef and bison and elk and deer, I feel so much better just on every level. And I've heard from, I think, vegans and vegetarians that meat increases your sleep requirements. Have you heard that? Because you look at carnivores and they sleep a lot, right? Like my cat, she sleeps 80% of the time or whatever.
Crocodiles too, but that's good. Now, the trick is, I learned from Adonal Lay, sometimes called Swami Nitty Gritty, sleep conscious. Because that's the best way, because you can, if you manage your delta brainwave, that is regeneration, and omega brainwave even more. But your theta brainwave, you're actually, if you're dreaming, you're working out all your traumas, because people have it during the day, and so they're doing their homework at night, getting ready for certain things, and working out their traumas. But when you get to the state of Turiya, like yoga, you're in a delta state, and at that point it's all regeneration. So it depends on what you do with your consciousness and sleeping. Now, people 100 years ago, they had different types of things. Hibernation was much more natural. One lady called the Wanderer, she would go walking around the English countryside, and she would sleepwalk. And then this would happen episodically every 6-7 months. Then she would suddenly fall down and be unconscious for as much as 6 weeks without going to the bathroom, without having to urinate or do any kind of fecal thing. And then she'd wake up 7 weeks later, perfectly fine. Didn't lose any weight, much like a grizzly bear. And nobody at that time bothered to measure what was happening carbon dioxide wise. So we really don't know about those. But that was very common. If you go back in the old books, you'll find that the doctors would be commenting about it. And now any of those are kind of suppressed, and maybe they don't even happen as much because of the cultural context. Maybe.
Interesting. What, I know you're a big movie buff, and I think you have a great list. I always see you posting. I'm like, these look like cool movies. I'm like making a list of things to watch. What do you think about watching scary movies like Nightmare on Elm Street before going to bed? Because you have to process that, right? Because I tend to avoid like gory movies. I used to watch like B horror movies because it would be a comedy. I would laugh, they're like strangling people with intestines and stuff. But that's like something that your brain has to work through, right?
It depends on the brain, because sometimes you're working through in the movie what you don't have to do in the dream. And so, I'm big on revenge movies, frankly. The Django Unchained or whatever it is, one of my favorite movies by Quentin Tarantino. I love the positive movies. Grand Canyon, Resurrection, those kind of movies, though, are definitely more inspiring and do more for your health than the others. But if a person is frustrated and they have anger in them, then sometimes seeing those type of revenge movies, Charles Bronson, whatever, can work things out. Unfortunately, many people are psychologically unstable. So they go out and shoot people for real. So I don't know. I think they should be legal, but I think we should be cautious and realize that some people, that just goes deep into their unconscious. And I think the problem is there before the movie, but the movie just gives them something to feed off of.
Yeah, you think about kids raised on crazy chemicals in the food supply and the water supply, and then playing Grand Theft Auto right before they go to bed, or these shoot 'em up, Call of Duty or whatever. I kind of grew up with those games. It's like first person shooter,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's like you're that being, that avatar in the game. It's kind of freaky what that probably does to the brain, but
I have a friend like that. He's in France, and he was one of the original people. When to do what they can do in seconds now, it would take him all day to put these into the games. But he's not making money in that department because he won't do the violent ones, and that's what they're selling. 99% of it is a violent game, and the other ones, when they make them, don't sell, so they don't bother to make them. Yeah, in fact, my grandson is actually, he's become pretty much close to a millionaire now playing those games. He's one of the youngest producers of money. And my son tried to talk him out of it, and now he said, we're glad he didn't listen to us.
wow.
Frosty, I'm so Frosty Bergstrom is his name. You'll find him on the internet. Got his own, I think, does he have a Wikipedia page now, did you say? Or just, no, his own personal page, anyway. Yeah, he's funny. Rocking and rolling.
I want to give a shout out. My older brother is a board game fanatic, and it's really cool because he plays, we're talking about way beyond Monopoly and Risk. These are like really complex, but he has a YouTube channel called Cosmic Tavern where he makes like short 5-10 minute videos on how to play, like quick directions. And so it's cool. Whenever I go to visit my family, we'll bust out a board game, and it might be an hour or 2 hours, but I think it's way better than looking at a screen. And I do feel like it's working my brain. Like it is kind of like a workout.
It is. My son is really good at that too. He actually at one time was a Pac-Man. He had the world record at one time. And one time we went to Santa Cruz, and my girlfriend and I were riding on the roller coaster. So he said, I'm not going. I want to just play the game here. And I said, well, here's a handful of quarters. He said, you know me better than that, Dad. Give me one. 3 hours. He's still on that machine, got a crowd around him, and there was a big crowd, and he had doubled the record on the machine. And finally they came in, we're closing up the park. You got to leave. Yeah, and my first wife used to crush me at Scrabble. I couldn't play any games, so I'm not a gamer. I don't know. They get it from their mother.
That's so cool. I grew up going to Nickel City. Those are, I think, mostly a California thing, but it's kind of a scam because it's multiple nickels. The game isn't just one nickel. You have to put in like 20 nickels.
Yeah.
But I like the reflex games because there was just one where it's just one button and there's just things that are scrolling horizontal. And when you press the button, they stop. And you have to tower it and stack them, and they get smaller and smaller. And I would get addicted. I'd just be there for hours, like playing. And you could win prizes, that are hanging there. And it's kind of fun. But
Interesting.
I wanted to ask you about music. I grew up with an interesting kind of mashup. Classical and heavy metal were like the two genres that I was into, and they actually kind of mesh. There are a lot of groups that kind of combine those. But you often hear, if a pregnant woman listens to classical music, then the IQ goes up. But recently I've been reading about heavy metal and like angry music that's actually not harmful, right? Because you hear that a lot. But as you were talking about violent movies, listening to that type of music can actually help you process traumas, right?
Well, if you sit down and listen to heavy metal, it can't be harmful. But what is it used for? Heavy metal in a gym. You'll find that gym records are broken under heavy metal, and many gyms, they play it. My son, by the way, one of them is obsessed with heavy metal music. And I was lifting weights at the time he was conceived. And to show you how an affirmation works, I never became as strong as he did, but he was called Caveman and could basically have superpowers. They called him Caveman because the truck driver couldn't lift a door at Walmart with both hands, and he comes along with one hand and lifts it. So he actually has superpowers. And a lot of it has to do with I really desired I met a world-class bodybuilder named Don Peters. You can still find him on the internet. He became a friend of mine, and he was my coach. Then I got sick, probably too much tuna fish and mayonnaise, and I got really laid up for a while and kind of got out of the groove. But at that time, I really had a lot of mental energy going toward weightlifting, and my son became super strong, super athlete, actually. He could pitch a ball 103 miles an hour, something like that. Yeah, he had all kinds of records.
Wow. And then that actually leads into my questions. I want to ask you about like sarcopenia, muscle wasting, and then bone density loss. You can kind of prevent those two just by having some type of strength. Like I've been using resistance bands with this bar and with a ground plate, and it's like less than 10 minutes, and I'm just loading the muscle with these bands in a way that's kind of protecting the joints. It's called the X3. It's kind of cool. I interviewed the guy that invented it, but I think it's kind of safer than weights. But what's your strategy for like preventing muscle loss and bone loss as you age?
Actually, if at this point I don't really have access to a gym for different reasons, but I would love to own a gym because I love free weights mostly, and then some of the other lifting exercises where you do the spread your legs, and use your fascia lata and your inner leg muscles. Those are very beneficial, and I'd have one of those adjustable chinning devices and things. But yeah, there's lots of different ways of doing it and ways of building muscle, and you can actually use, the weeder people, you got to have 12 reps and all that. Well, one time I met a bicycler. He came in with huge calves. And I told him, obviously you didn't get that riding a bicycle. He said, yes, I did, but you got to know how to do it. And the trick is, to get a calf like that, you have to have it go completely stretched out to the maximum. Otherwise, you're caught between the twilight zone, between the soleus muscle and the gastrocnemius. So also, in a gym, I never could build my lats, no matter what I did on that machine. I got in the water and I did the breaststroke for about a half hour, and I'd come out with my arms swollen. And that summer, I actually had lats for the first time in my life, which was also always a slow mover. So in other words, you have to figure out what your body requires. And yes, I think exercise is important because they consider bone loss a disease. Before, it was just natural aging. And now sarcemia, they're realizing, is not natural aging, as neither is bone loss. So you really have to do something to keep moving, to keep those muscles going. Yes.
Awesome. I love it. Probably working on a farm, like I'll probably be chopping wood in the snow, and maybe just like having a farm is enough, right? That's probably all you need if you hunt and you're always active and you're foraging and bending down and picking berries. And I think a gym isn't necessary, right? If you kind of are out in the country, maybe.
Out in the country, yes. In fact, people that do tumbling and things like that, they're going to have generally healthier bodies when they get it that way. And working in a farm and doing like gypsy boots who swung from trees. All the lovin's that they had in California, here he was swinging from trees and branches and hanging upside down like kids do out in the woods. When I was raised in New Jersey in the country, we'd be climbing trees and shimmying them and hanging from them and dropping from one limb to the other and all of that. And we were in really good shape at that time. Yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
country living, good.
I love it. So I'm going to kind of lump these three sections together. People are really concerned, like there's whole health summits, online seminars with all these different doctors. And I have friends that join these, like about heavy metals and gut health. There's whole seminars on that, and infections, whether like retroviruses are trending right now from vaccines. And, there's Lyme and there's parasites and there's bacteria and the fungus. But all of these things like microbiome, heavy metals, infections, it's my understanding that just supporting the metabolism, you're supporting the immune system. And so you don't really have to micromanage these things too much, right? I mean, maybe lowering endotoxin, there are a little bit of specific things, but I think people tend to overcomplicate, right, with those.
I definitely agree with you. And Ray Peat, of course, he's saying a lot of the, you actually give an animal and sterilize them, and they live longer than other animals. Now, that may be a little extreme, but he's on the right track. People just go overboard with all these bowel cleansers and everything like that. Now let's go back to the original bowel investigator, Dr. Beaumont, William Beaumont. He investigated a guy who blew a musket hole in his stomach. So he had a hole. So he looked at this guy for 15 years, and he put all the digestive times of all the food, but he found something really unusual. If he got stressed, he couldn't digest anything in his stomach for as much as 48 hours. So look at where the most important part of digestion is. The stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine are extremely susceptible to cognitive shocks, not even stress, but the type of shock that you can't handle. Exercise is a counter shock. It's a beneficial shock. But when you have a shock from a relative, a parent, a spouse, or whatever, then you imagine turning your stomach digestion off for 48 hours and stuff is running down. None of the proteins are being digested. They're just going through, or they're too late for them. Yeah. And he proved it back in 1830s. This was written.
Wow. Yeah, because I sell enzyme products, multiple digestive enzymes, and I've been taking those for years. And it's my understanding the pancreas makes at least 50% less enzymes when you're stressed. And as you said, it could be psychological, but it could also be from just PUFAs being released into your bloodstream, right, and increasing cortisol.
PUFAs will do it. Yeah, lipofuscinosis, cumulative lipofuscinosis is one of the major causes of people dying, and more so now that people are taking all these omega-3s, that they didn't. Fish used to be considered a poor person's food, and that's why desert people live so long. They don't have access to PUFAs mostly. I mean, the seafood's on the coast. You'll find that seafaring people, unless they're on an island like Okinawa, where they don't eat the fish, they eat the potatoes, they eat the pork. And look at Costa Rica. It's a blue zone. They live right on the coast. Do they eat the fish? No. They eat pork and they eat beans. So
interesting. And kind of a side question. I interviewed a guy that's kind of in the rewilding, kind of vitalist kind of view, and foraging acorns and stuff. Hazelnuts, he was saying, are a traditional like European food, and those are pretty high in saturated fats, right? Those are one of the better nuts.
Actually, hazelnut has what's the chemical in that they use for cancer therapy? It actually has it's the yew tree that they use for chemotherapy. I forget the name of the yew tree. I can't think of the drug, but actually it's in hazelnuts.
Oh,
so
I know
in small amounts.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Sorry.
And the yew tree seems to be something to do with have something to do with longevity, because yew trees live longer than redwoods, they find out. And why they miss that is because they don't have a ring every year. So they were reading the rings only. And a yew tree will actually go into some kind of hibernation effect. They claim there is a yew tree in England that Judas Iscariot played on as a kid.
Wow. Yeah. Taxanes. I think and they made a pharmaceutical out of it. Taxotere.
That's it. That's exactly it. You got it.
That's so funny. One of the health conferences, it was one of the first health conferences I was at. It was a company, I can't remember, it was Montana or something, and they made tinctures, I think yew tinctures, and they made creams and stuff. And I was kind of fascinated by that. It's kind of cool.
The hazelnuts are a good source of zinc too, and so they are good for the pancreas and other organs. Yeah, and sometimes some of these nuts will have important other particles in. Like I even eat a walnut every morning and a pecan sometimes, or half of one. And it has vitamin E, it has other things in it that are necessary. But I don't recommend taking a lot of those, because you will get all these PUFAs, and indeed, too many nuts do it. I use an almond because they're extremely high in vitamin E. And if you look at the profile, there's a surprising amount of oleic acid. And I actually find that the omega-3s are the worst. Omega-6s, I couldn't write a book on. I'm sure they're bad. People say they are. But I couldn't write one book. Well, I could write a 10th and 11th and a 12th book on omega-3s easily. It is amazing to me that people can't see the truth in this, because it's so easy to research. Anybody just put yellow fat disease, bears, they get it. When they eat salmons, they get it. If they don't eat salmon, they don't get yellow fat disease. A bear that eats a lot of salmon because they can't get their regular food dies earlier, full of lipofuscin. It's right there on the internet.
It's funny, a lot of people will message me and say, I'm trying to explain this to a friend. Do you have this is like 90% of the questions I get about PUFA is, do you have a study? You can send me a link that I could send to my friend. And I kind of try to explain it. Why would they have a definitive study that stops the whole cancer industry, right? You really have to look at, like you said, search engine optimization, and you have to search for acrolein, right? Lipid peroxidation. All the things at the top of the list are going to be all positive, right? About omega-3s, because it feeds our medical system in a bad way.
Well, out of the causes of yellow fat disease, Wikipedia doesn't even mention omega-3 fatty acids. And what's going on with all those crocodiles dying in Africa, they don't even mention that, except some people have mentioned it, but they're repressing it. The National Geographic magazine is in cahoots with NASA to suppress it because they're buddies. And so they won't let it known that those what happened is a fish got into Africa that eats algae. And then another fish ate that, the carp ate that, and it turns out that the alligator and crocodile family are especially the most sensitive to omega-3s of any. They rubberize within a week from eating those fish. Rubberize and just drop over dead. So they try to blame pollutants in the river and everything else. And it's very obvious for anybody who studies yellow fat disease. And as for links, my 9 books are pretty boring because they're just studies. And so I just basically copied parts of WebMD and everything out there. If you go and put cats, yellow fat disease, horses, yellow fat disease, and then find statements that humans are about mid-range, some say the worst sensitive, but that's not true. But they're very sensitive to yellow fat disease. And so the answer is right there. But anybody doesn't have to buy my books. If they just put yellow fat disease cats, yellow fat disease dogs, yellow fat disease horses, yellow fat disease minks, go down A, B, C through all the animal kingdom and find out how much yellow fat disease is prevalent from eating omega-3s.
That's awesome. And people always ask, where do they come from? And it's really not a matter of avoidance, but restricting them, right? And just being a little cognizant of where they're coming in. And it's nuts, seeds, especially unsprouted, grains, legumes, soy, and then some veggies, right? It's like most of them.
Our liver can handle a certain amount, but when you overload it with it and think that it's actually necessary for health, and of course we know that from Ray Peat and other sources that I forget their names now, George and someone in 1929.
Burr.
Oh, Mildred Burr, yeah.
Burr.
That's it, the Burrs. They said that they were essential. By the way, they only said omega-6s were essential. Omega-3s were not. They were made essential by the World Health Organization in the 1990s, finally. What's going on there? They never did say specifically that omega-3s were. Well, in Rice University, the famous scientist who discovered various B vitamins, Roger something, I believe, he proved that you don't need, that they're not essential, and that it was a B vitamin deficiency. And now Ray Peat has gone on and on about that, so I don't have to do that. Anyone can check that out, that it's all false. It's chemical warfare. Plants do not like us eating them. They just don't. It's like if we go and have a fruit, it's like they give us the fruit. But if we eat their leaves and their roots, it's like, look, you're eating my arm. I mean, pardon me, I gave you a fruit, you're eating my arm and my hand? I don't like this. So I'm going to do chemical warfare on you because I can't run away. So anyway.
I just interviewed a friend on Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 and how that hooks in with like the fake meat and 3D printed food. And I think we've touched on that a little bit previously. But it gets scary because you look into like you mentioned the WHO, you look into their documents, and there is just a list of action plans for sustainable development, and some of them are crazy, like introducing large carnivores to open forested areas. Just like weird little things, just like they're kind of like terraforming humanity. But it's a really complicated situation we're in because not only do we not have an instruction manual for this body, but there's like a concerted effort for depopulation, right? So it's
Definitely.
interesting. Yeah.
Definitely. And I mentioned in my Death Busters that there was a scientist. His name escapes me now, too. Julius something or other. And he said we can support a population of 30 billion people easily, and that it's all a lie. And he wanted people to multiply as fast as they can, because at one time he actually started in birth control for different countries. Then one time he happened to see the Iwo Jima flag, and a rabbi had done a eulogy where he said, what a shame how many Mozarts were killed and Einsteins were killed and Beethovens were killed by this. We don't know. And suddenly he realized that's where our creativity comes. The more population, the more creativity you do to handle these. And of course, I'm a big proponent of space travel. I think we should get off. We're in the cradle of civilization. Let's get out of the cradle and get out there to the stars and populate it, because this sun is going down the tube to ashes eventually.
That was my next question for you. That's so funny, because in the Death Busters book, I love your space things, and I think a lot of like this is a big point of contention, I think, between like naturalists and people that are into rewilding and hunting, foraging, and getting back to nature. Because I think you could have kind of both, and I think when people think of space, they think of the kind of evil organization NASA,
Right.
and of all these other things. But there's like a positive way, just like with longevity, right? Space doesn't have to be this negative thing where we're building weapons out there and it's all crazy and it's a control grid. There's a good way to go about it, I believe.
As the Donald Lay said, why argue about an 8 by 10 piece of real estate here when you can go out and have a whole planet to yourself? And I really believe we can do that. And this will take some genetic research, because we have animals that are immortal, that you can put as much radiation. So sharing some genes there, I'm not for. The problem is with genes now, it's all a scam. Most of it doesn't work. So we have to take the maybe 3% of genetic therapy that actually works, and they could research that, but they don't want to do it because we have a deathist and ageist civilization. People believe it's immoral to live past 100 years. A lot of people actually do. Scientists, even futurists. One name escapes me, but there's a lot of them out there that say you're immoral. I've seen an actual YouTube video, an argument between Aubrey de Grey and this really famous scientist who's saying you're immoral. And ironically, that scientist is now approaching his 100-year birthday. So
That's
he's getting
hilarious.
it naturally. It is.
I love the part of your Death Busters book where you brought up birthday cards, because even though it's cheesy, my whole family, I've been buying them for years for my parents and my brother. And even before I was really deep into longevity and really passionate about it, like I am today, like life extension, I would never buy a birthday card for my family that was, oh, this sucks, it's getting harder to move, and all of these like very negative deathist kind of, you open up the card and it's like you're going downhill. Right? I would always pick the cards that are more positive and that are just kind of funny, but not in like a death kind of promoting way. So,
You
but it's
know,
interesting. That's most of the cards.
you're smarter than I was, because until I met Swami Nitty Gritty, who told me to stop doing that, oh, this is funny. Your teeth are underwater. You're going to get old, all that kind of stuff. I thought it was funny, and I studied slang and the beatniks and the hippies and all that. But then when I met Nitty Gritty, he said, what you say is what you get. So you're basically doing a voodoo curse on these people, and it happens. Yeah, so they should really, they need a serious upgrade at Hallmark cards, because they're all negative for birthday. As soon as you get a 40-year-old birthday card, 9/10 of them, maybe 19 out of 20, are negative,
I guess that's when I have a printer. That's when you have to buy a printer, right, for $50 and then start making your own birthday cards for your family.
I thought of doing some blogs, just going to the drugstore and opening up and writing some of the deathist and ageist things there, We believe basically that when people get to a certain age, they should be put aside. But then we have Jack LaLanne, we have Gypsy Boots, and we have people out there, the mighty Atom's son. He's pulling cars up hills with his teeth, and he's 97 now. So what about those people? They're not sitting in nursing homes. So many people I see 10, 20 years younger than Gypsy Boots and Jack LaLanne, they're in nursing homes and they're in wheelchairs and they can't get around because of diet and mental conditioning too.
That's why I love your work is I know a lot of people, biohackers, and I kind of moved away from that community, although I still use devices and stuff, but there's a huge like community, emotional, spiritual aspect, I think, to living a long time. And yeah, for me, it's like what you're talking about, like positive affirmations or whatever you want to call it, or compliments, or just having, good people around you that are supportive. That's like a question I had for you is coffee, smoking, and drinking. So, I mean, even like homegrown tobacco or cigars, people are like, wow, that's going to kill you. Or drinking a glass of wine a day, or, drinking coffee. I think, 9 people out of 10 in the longevity community would say that's all bad for you, right? That's all decreasing your lifespan.
And
But
yet coffee,
I found a study with
coffee,
alcohol. It decreases lipofuscin a little bit. So
yeah. Oh yeah, tiny amounts of it can actually make a difference. In fact, at nighttime I take a hormone balancer with 100% agave tequila, and usually like a tablespoon, the most ever a shot. And I mix it in pineapple juice, also in the bromeliad family, and then I take aloe with it. And those three are actually a hormone builder. And my doctor friend told a couple about that, and they went and conceived when they didn't conceive before. So
that's so yeah, fructose, like it's my understanding, like I have friends that drink, and it's my understanding, like if you're going to go out on the town, then fructose protects the liver. That's like the main thing, right? That prevents
yeah, and of course they
damage.
want to tell us that it's bad. And look at all the roots. The root foods are fructose, and the morning foods, it means fruit sugar, for God's sake. So fruit sugar now suddenly becomes a poison, And then the omega acids that are in there, they're supposed to be good for you. Well, most of those are not. They're the defense. But the sugar is its life force. Our brain runs on sugar.
Hmm. And I wanted to ask you about alcohol because I think it was yesterday or the day before, I was reading about how it destroys like a male's uh, fertility and, even just ability to perform if they're trying to, produce a child. That's true, right? But it's mainly in high amounts with
High
alcohol.
amounts. Small amounts can actually help with that and make a person more sexual, but
Hmm.
it's a razor's edge on that and how much. Now it depends on the person's weight, immunity, and a lot of other functions, the size of their liver. Many people have different lobes in their liver. Some have 8 lobes, 3 lobes, 2 lobes, different livers. So we can't just say that one person's liver is exactly like the other. That's the problem with tests. Tests are eugenic. They take an arbitrary time. It's like taking that person is black or that person is red, that person has a big nose, that has a small nose, and this is the optimum nose size. Well, some people can get by on a very high cholesterol, over 300, and other people on a very low cholesterol. See, we have to take those things in consideration, and that's why I don't think much of testing. I think there is a place once in a while, but when's the last time I had a test? God, decades ago. When I still believed, I believed in the medical profession, sort of, when I got out of high school. But I was already into health food, so I knew there were a lot of wrong things about it. And one time when I had a problem, when I got out of high school, they couldn't fix it. So I fixed it myself. And then I became really suspicious after that. I used nutrition to fix a problem that they couldn't fix with all their drugs. I took every antibiotic you can imagine. They gave me chloramycetin even, which can kill you. And anyway,
That's
that's when I
interesting.
became natural.
I've been into the full Monty iron panel, and it shows like your iron's percent saturation, and I'm quite high. I think I'm like 30%. I should be closer to 20%. And then like red blood cell magnesium, and it's like an under $200 test. It's kind of cool, but I think that's like a good start for people and could kind of see.
I'm not definitely not against tests, but but again, we have to take the high and lows into consideration what they really mean, because one person could be using it for something else differently. See, they act like the receptor theory, which I'm sure you've heard Ray Peat diss that, and Gilbert Ling and Gerald Pollack. that whole receptor, it sells things. Oh, this goes to here and does this, and it doesn't affect anything else. Well, there are no side effects. There's only effects. And that's the problem when we take something. We don't realize that you don't just affect one thing like an estrogen receptor. No, it's global. It's carpet bombing with estrogen. It doesn't go to one place on a woman and one place on a man, etc. The true female hormone, as there is one, is progesterone. And it works well for a man. If he doesn't get too much, then it turns off Mr. Happy.
Yeah, I always loved in an interview, Ray Pete was like, if you get in a car accident, I would squeeze a whole bottle of like Progesti or like a whole bottle of progesterone in my mouth, I guess, to neutralize that stress. I always laughed at that. It's interesting.
Yeah, another thing, I would take a whole, I would take a empty mayonnaise jar of white sugar if I was in an accident, seriously. Because I used that technique about 3 years ago when Susie got a virus that caused her to go into a tonic seizure. I thought she had died in my arms. Well, I couldn't get the flu. So then I thought, I'm going to try Ray Pete's thing. I drank 2 quarts of coffee and about a couple of jars of white sugar per day, and I never got the flu. Now, at one point I thought, this is crazy. I'm going to wean myself off it. I started to get the flu. Ran right in, ate a whole bunch of white sugar, a whole bunch of coffee, made some new, and got some beef from the owner of the ranch who happened to have some organic beef, and ate that. And anyway, I never got the flu. Everybody else, by the way, people on the ranch that were separate from us, they went to the hospital. 2 people were taken to the hospital from that flu. It was so serious.
Wow. It's funny you say that because a lot of my breakfasts are just leftover from the previous night, grass-fed ground beef. I'll just cook it in coconut oil or ghee and reheat it. And then I'll have a cup of coffee with the maple syrup, your cobalamin tonic, essentially. I don't put cacao in it, but I have the sugar and the protein, and I'm good for the day. Like I feel so charged up from doing that in the morning. It's kind of cool.
Well, the cocoa and the coffee have benefits together, but the coffee and the cocoa either are very beneficial. The whole thing about acids in coffee, it's an industry term. It doesn't mean acids at all. It has nothing to do with pH or acid-alkaline balance at all. And yet people still quote it. Even that crazy pharmacist who has been interviewed on various shows, who has the Revisi textbook on for anyone to look at the internet, he is a pharmacist and he makes that mistake that coffee is acidic. Coffee is one of the rarest things. It comes out in your urine neutral. Only a couple of chemicals do that. Coffee is one, and strangely enough, real vitamin C comes out neutral.
Wow.
If you take the supplemental kind, it's not gonna be neutral anymore, but it neutralizes your body. Your bladder may be a different thing when you take lots of supplemental. It will make it acidic.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been drinking coffee for years, but I was doing it wrong, putting stevia because I thought sugar was evil. For the first 2 or 3 years I was into it, doing basically the bulletproof kind of style. But I think its effects on iron inhibition, its effects on the liver, the chlorogenic acid, the palmitic acid, and then the caffeine having like progesterone and thyroid-like effects. It really is a superfood,
Lots of
right?
things in it. Caffeine is the anti-carcinic effect. If you look at tea, it's not those phenols that are in the tea. It's the caffeine in the tea. Johns Hopkins admitted it. You can find that study on the internet. Yeah, so coffee is a very powerful food, why it's been used for a long time. In fact, the bulletproof coffee was first discovered by Middle Easterners in Yemen, I think, where the camel drivers would take butter and coffee on their butter, dates, and coffee, and eat that, and that's all they would survive on when they took these long caravans.
Wow. Interesting. Well, let's jump into the Q&A. I have maybe about 10 questions, and I'm sure we'll kind of have offshoots from them so we can kind of see. This one's one that I get a lot. Do you still stand behind fluoride calcification being beneficial? People get so emotional about this. Like, what do you mean fluoride's okay?
No.
For the pineal gland.
No, the fluoride is the worst enemy, but it doesn't calcify it. It eats holes in it. If you take a bunch of fluoride, what does it do? Your teeth get mottled. It takes the calcium out. And the calcium is actually are called otoliths. They're in your hearing for balance, and they're in your pineal gland. So the fluoride is the enemy of it, but it doesn't calcify it. You want it to calcify. It decalcifies it. In fact, the particular type of calcium you want is type of, golly, I have to think of what it is. Basically, they used to make Polaroid cameras out of it before they switched to quinine and things like that they used for the original experiments on it. So that particular type of calcium, which you can look up easily, is there, and guess what? The fluoride destroys it. So yeah, it just like, if you read Chemical and Engineering News, they say, this is the chemists, not the health food magazine, the chemists themselves. The proportion of bone cancer is directly proportional to the amount of fluorine you take in your mouth. That's a chemist, for God's sake, not a health food guru. So fluoride, yeah, it's crazy that we have it in our water system, and you even have to be careful of it in your well water and make sure that you guard against it. A little bit again, you get some natural fluoride in an onion and a garlic, that's okay. But if you grow it in fluoridated soil, it sucks it up, and you got trouble. So you should know the soil where the food is grown to make sure you don't overdose on fluoride.
That's awesome. And the form too, because there's sodium and calcium fluoride, right? So it's different. People don't look at that. They just say fluoride and like it. Yeah.
They both are bad, but the sodium fluoride is rat poison, out and out rat poison. But the other will kill you too. It's just a little slower.
This is a fun one. Do you get superpowers from growing your hair out like the Native Americans?
You know, according to Adonole, he said, yes, you want to grow it out. And then I said, oh my God, I'm in big trouble. And he said, fortunately, the pores can do a lot of that too. But yeah, long hair is actually, let your freak flag fly, as they say. There's benefits to it, yes. And hair should be investigated because the antenna length, just like you have a 2-inch and a 2-foot, 3-foot, 4-foot different frequencies, you can actually control the length of your hair and get various frequencies, and even change the thickness of your hair by certain foods you eat and the melanin content, et cetera, in your hair.
That makes sense. Oh, sorry.
No, that's it. I just yuck.
I was going to say, I always think about, like, people talk about forest bathing, and there's like a Chinese or there's like an Asian term for that. I can't remember, but just hiking basically in a forest, and you think about all of the animals and the bird songs and the chirping and those high frequency, there's ultrasonic sounds, right? If you're outside on your porch and there's bats making their screeches that you can't pick up, in the normal auditory, I'm sure your length of hair affects how those hit your brain, right? It's kind of interesting.
They do. And when people are mesmerized, by the way, many people can hear bats and frequencies normally you can't hear. What's that all about? So we kind of sell ourselves short. As the Swami I studied with said, we sell ourselves short. We have superpowers, but we can tune like in Dark City, but most people don't know they have those powers, so they become victims.
Interesting. Why is yawning healing? Someone asks.
Extended yawning, because you build up carbon dioxide. I really want to have a dialogue with Ray Pete about this because he's not a fan of yawning. I wrote him an email and he wrote me back. But extended yawning, you start building up carbon dioxide when you go beyond 6 seconds. So 7 seconds, 8 seconds, 9 seconds. And every animal, when we say we're under pressure, you need to equalize that pressure to the environment. In fact, when you go up and change altitude, say you go down to Palm Springs from where you are, you want to do a lot of yawning because then you don't have what they got when they went down to that altitude in Tibet was something called tuberculosis. And they're spending all this money raising funds and UNESCO and everybody trying to cure tuberculosis, and all they got to do is yawn. First of all, they were stressed from the move, and then they went down in altitude. So of course they got sick. So they could either move back up to the altitude until they adjust or go down slowly. But they went down quickly. And it's a disease that they're fighting that is a fictional disease that can be cured simply by extended yawning and stretching. Pandiculation, it's called. Look at a cat. They actually adjust to the environment and their own stresses, and that's why they have 9 lives, right?
I love it. Yeah, I have a friend that does resistance stretching. Oh, the Genius of Flexibility. That's what it's called. And I really like. I'm friends with a lot of really advanced body work, stretching, biomechanics people. Like functional patterns is another cool one. But yeah, he always posts like the picture of the tiger arching its back.
Now, you don't do it, though, before a workout. That's the absolute wrong time to stretch because you want to tighten the muscle for a workout. Mike Metzer, the bodybuilder, was correct about that you actually want to, that stretching they do before workouts is a bunch of nonsense. But afterwards, after the workout, certainly, then you want the super compensation. You want the muscle to regrow and grow larger than it was in the first place, or stronger, depending on what type of exercise you're doing.
Awesome. Okay, this is another good one. Magic mushrooms, yay or nay? And I know it's just legalized in Colorado, and I think people are taking those like candy. I don't know if it's the best thing.
I've had a history of psychedelics, frankly, and I think they get in the way of meditation ultimately. Fortunately, after doing I think I did about 23 acid trips. I did Hawaiian wood rose. I did this and that. I did a bunch of natural supposed chemicals and all that stuff, and other drugs as well. I met a guy, a hippie, who had done 250 trips, and he said, ultimately it's like going around a revolving door. But I think you will not, the idea of using it for spiritual purposes, no, that's not true. But for mind purposes, I went back on my first LSD trip to childhood and found a trauma that I went to my mother with, and she denied it, mainly because I told her, hey, I took acid, Mom, and so she got really upset, right? But then she admitted, yeah, your memory is true. So I went and used the LSD to see sepia-colored photographs come down one after another, click, 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 like that, and was able to find some psychological traumas. So ayahuasca, magic mushrooms, these things, they have their place. I just don't, I stopped doing them a long time ago.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Ray Pete's comments on LSD. Like I think in a Josh Rubin interview, there was like a 2 or 3 minute clip where he talked about it. And then there's some text, little quotes people have written, and it does lower serotonin. And I think there are actual studies that show it helps you it helps you think about the future and the present and kind of process the past. So it's interesting.
And of course you want to lower serotonin, which they don't tell you. If you look up, what does serotonin do? It's in the poisons of hornets. What got that animal whisperer, the crocodile whisperer? That was a serotonin poison. All those serotonins, if you want serotonin, grab a stinging nettle. That's serotonin. So how can that possibly relax you? And they know now, Ray Pete isn't the only one that's found that. That's a scam. However, in the drug that they take with serotonin, there apparently are other things in it, and I can't vouch for that, but Ray Pete claims there are, and other people do. So that's why they get results. But also, 33% placebo. Always remember those statistics. That's AMA statistics, not mine.
Yeah, a lot of people have gut issues, and I know if even some people, they recently they're like, I swear by peptide therapy, like injectable peptides are a big craze right now in the biohacking community. These long chains of amino acids, but irritable bowel disease, Crohn's disease, I've read these have a strong link to high serotonin. So it's really interesting.
They do. Yeah, they really do. Because, imagine stinging nettle when you took it raw and it went down your intestines and started irritating you. And they've known that actually endorphins in our body can actually cause neck paralysis. Many people who have stiff necks, it's because of endorphins. Endorphins are for losers. If you have a race, all the runners in the marathon have high endorphins and enkephalins. But guess what? The winner doesn't. The winner has high dopamine levels. And maybe the second and third, unless they are a person that, I've got to be number one, then they have a problem. but the people in the pack tend to have less serotonin, the back end, lower serotonin. I mean, no, higher serotonin and enkephalins, endorphins, and whatever they call the other fragments of loser hormones is what they are. We all lose, so we're going to need them, but you don't go seeking losing.
You have to say, I'm a winner, right?
I am a winner. There's a remarkable book called Zen in the Brain by a Zen practitioner and a medical doctor who goes into all the paralysis that endorphins cause. And of course, it's a big scam. You want those enkephalins and those endorphins. They're wonderful. Natural body-made opioids.
And when I used to hear about serotonin, and every health person I listen to talking about gut health, they say, remember, 80% of the serotonin is made in the gut, and it's like this big, like, this is awesome thing. But really, I mean, it's the endotoxin kind of, right, the bad pathogenic bacteria that's making that. And then if you have glyphosate and all these holes punched in your intestines, I've been looking into like high dose bone broth or gelatin, even gelatin powder. Like some people take like 50 grams plus a day of gelatin. Have you looked into that? Have you done like marshmallows and gummies? And
I've seen people doing that, and there's validity to it. You can make your own collagen from sugar, though, but there's something to that, particularly if you need it quickly. Then those things are available, and even Jell-O and gummies and things like that.
Yeah, someone needs to make like a healthy Jell-O, because I grew up with it, and there's just like food dyes, right, in that Jell-O stuff, and like red dye, and
one of the problems. By the way, serotonin, about 97% of it is made in the gut.
Wow.
And the foremost serotonin researcher in the world, I have his book. He was so stunned by that he's the one that started really spreading it. Before that, it wasn't well known. But he did the original research, and it just blew his mind. The other thing is, though, guess what? LSD does almost everything it does in the gut. It's only in the brain for a matter of maybe 2 minutes, and only 1% of it. So how are we getting high? It's not even a brain thing. It's a liver. Timothy Leary supposed that, because he was aware of this, that the Babylonians were right, that consciousness might be in the liver. And indeed, there is a certain amount of it, just like you hear about people getting heart transplants. My own sister-in-law went out and bought a motorcycle after she got a transplanted liver from a biker. Donor cycle, they call it.
Yeah, I just renewed my driver's license, and one of the questions was, do you want to donate, whatever, your organs? And I clicked no. It freaks me out.
Of course, my sister-in-law is really for it, but now they'll be able to 3D print them. They're working on that right here in Santa Barbara. They'll be able to actually take tissue, stem cells and everything, and pre-do all these organs. And I'm for that, but I prefer to be natural as possible. But for a person, if they're dying of cancer and you can just take out their organ and put it in, and by the way, they don't tell us, people are dying of pancreatic cancer. How come they discovered in South America in the 1940s that you could live without a pancreas? They don't tell you that part. Now, I don't know how they did it because they repressed this guy's research, but anybody can go back in the scientific books and find out that's true.
Wow. And you could live without, like, what is it, one kidney, and you don't need your tonsils, right? There's a few things that are kind of...
You can even live without the adrenal glands that they take out of you because they're in your skin, and they don't tell you that. One of the secrets of getting energy from the sun is that every cell that has phenylalanine or tyrosine in the skin is an adrenal cell. The medulla adrenal, and that type of health is represented in 2 movies, and these are the grossest movies you're ever going to see. What's the name of the actor who did The Transporter 1, 2, and 3, and 4?
Oh yeah.
He was in a set of movies where he's unkillable, and in fact, David Carradine's last movie, when they stole his heart, is in it. Well, that's actually based. I love those movies because of the adrenaline. I disagree with Ray Pete on that. It's another way to gain longevity, and a little known way, and you can get that out of meat.
Jason Statham, yeah.
That's him. Whatever those movies are, they made 2 of them, But I warned anybody, they are totally gross. You got to be a pervert like me to watch those movies. But
Wasn't he injecting adrenaline? Was there, or morphine was one of the, or
it was, yeah, it had to do with adrenaline. And at the end of the first movie, he falls out of an airplane and he survives. He's calling his girlfriend at the end of the
I
movie.
remember that.
There was a lot of comedy to it. But
Uh-huh.
I loved that movie because at that very time I was finding medical books about repressed information that the adrenal glands are in the skin. Every cell that has phenylalanine, tyrosine, and it uses to transport the UV energy. This was found by General Electric in 1920s, maybe earlier. That has cholesterol, red blood cells, and several other chemicals and lipids in there. Not omega-3s though, I guarantee you. But they actually can transfer energy, including vitamin D. Stephanie Seneff is correct that vitamin D is a hormone, not a vitamin. But she says it's only cholesterol that can make vitamin D. That's not true. And anyone who goes back to that old General Electric research will get quite a surprise.
Wow, it's interesting because I was talking about cortisol with my carnivore friend in the last interview, and it's my understanding that protein in meat, like the muscle meat, is highly inflammatory and it does increase cortisol. But that's why you have some carbs with it, or some broth with it, and both of those things decrease it. But he was making the point that cortisol isn't the devil, right? It's not evil, it's not bad. It's just the timing. It just shouldn't be elevated all the time. Like if you're restricting sugar all the time, you're going to have constant high cortisol, right?
It's meant to be high in the morning, and then you can actually eat certain things in your breakfast that neutralize it. And, back in the day when I studied Asian medicine, I was confused. The adrenaline should be the yang, which is on the outside, and cortisone should be the yin, should be in the inside. And I said, something's wrong here, radically wrong. But it turns out that the adrenaline is not confined to the very center of the adrenal glands. Most of it is in the skin. And then it turns out that the cortisol is not confined there either, but it doesn't go into the skin. It stays in the organs. So it fits the oriental model of yin-yang perfectly. And that confused me for years before I found this other research, which is like a bonanza. Strangely enough, right after I found that information, I was asked to do a workshop on circadian nutrition at a dermatologist clinic. So I told all of these people about it, and I said, okay, you transplant a black man's skin on a white man, does it stay black or does it turn white, and why? None of these dermatologists knew, but I knew because I saw it in the research. When we tan, it's not a chemical reaction, it's an adrenal reaction. It's an immune reaction. And that's why some people have trouble tanning when they get older. It's nothing to do with the chemistry in the skin, or very little. It has to do with the health of your adrenal glands and your super immunity. That's why I love those Jason Statham movies, because you can extrapolate that into his movies. But again, if you want to hear a bunch of cuss words for an hour and a half, you're going to hear it in that movie.
That's fascinating.
I turned my co-authors to Yes, No, Maybe and her husband onto that, and they won't listen to my movie recommendations anymore after they saw that.
I would choose cussing over gore. I don't think it's, shoot 'em up's fine, but just the twisting the knife and all that stuff gets kind of weird.
True. Yeah, I pretty much avoid, Nightmare on Elm Street and all of those.
Freddy Krueger. That's really fascinating what you were saying, because I'm friends with Josh Rubin, Real Food Gangstas, East West Healing. He's been studying Ray Pete's info. He used to interview him, 17 years ago, or a long time ago. He's been in communication with them. And he talks a lot about adrenal stress lowering the ability of the liver to store glycogen. I find that relationship fascinating between the adrenals, the liver, and the thyroid. It's like that triangle. But the skin, I was just thinking as you were talking about red light, and when I stand in front of my panel for 20 minutes and turn like a rotisserie, I feel a definite stress reduction. And that's interesting because I don't know, my stack is kind of like sugar, vitamin C, and red light. And between those three, I have for sure my stress levels go way down. I could feel it.
In the 1910s, General Electric made the incandescent bulb to mimic campfires because they knew that the blue light at night would upset our rhythms. And they knew that what the cholesterol does is convert UV, which would kill us, into red light. The red light that you can shine through your hand, Ray Pete says he's even seen it through his belly if he waits in the dark long enough. That red light can penetrate you. If orange light could penetrate you, we'd be dead. That's a really interesting thing. So red light is one of the most therapeutic and will heal DNA. It will do a lot of things. It's a very important thing, and most important around sunrise and sunset particularly. And then I use a lower red light during the rest of the time because I'm just keeping the blue light at a minimum. So we use yellow incandescent lights for our reading and all that at night times. We basically take, since you can't get the white incandescent lights anymore, they're illegal, oh heaven forbid, they're bad for your health and the ecology. Instead of just leaving it on half as long, and saving the energy that way, we use yellow lights, and we get even more of that yellow light, which is a campfire type that we have been adjusting to for probably millions of years. A lot of people say the cooking of meat actually grew our brain, not the meat, the cooking of it.
Yeah, I point people to lightbulbs.com because even Amazon, they wouldn't send them to me. It was really weird. Talk about illegal. I don't know what's going on, but 25-watt orange party bulbs. And I just switch out all mine for that. And I used to have red in my RV, but I actually got a headache. I don't know if it was just not intense enough, but the red kind of screwed with my brain. So I moved up the spectrum to orange, and I feel a lot better with that at night.
Is one of Ray Pete's, he said anything from orange through red into the infrared spectrum. And by the way, some people can see into the infrared spectrum a lot further than they give credit for. But those are all healing. And that's one thing about the brooding light. It covers a wide spectrum. So the missing spectrum, you don't have to guess at which spectrum you need. It feeds you on all those levels of what you're missing. So that's a good strategy.
That's awesome. And I love what you said about orange light, killing us if it got to certain areas. If that's not a sign of intelligent design, I don't know what is, because when you look at how these frequencies, like visible red versus infrared, and they all penetrate to different depths, right, of the dermis and the epidermis and just the pores and the bone marrow, and each color will penetrate us at a different depth. That's mind-boggling to me. I think about that quite often.
What orange light will do is increase your libido. Red light is not the sexual color. Red light was designed by the railroad, meaning warning, don't go to this place. And a blue light meant this is legal prostitution. Orange light is the true sexual one. Bunnies mate under orange light. Ducks mate under orange light. If a person wants to increase their libido and their reproductive capacity, orange light.
Wow. Yeah. I started my red light or my light therapy adventure with the 250-watt heat lamps. I think he used that, and Ray Pete talks about it. And I think who was that light expert that I can't remember his name, but it's my understanding that's mostly orange. Those heat lamps. Yep. That's like the majority.
They have a lot of red orange in them. Yeah, kind of in between. But orange on, all is healing. But the only frequency that will go through the skin is red. You can clearly see that. But the red orange has other superficial effects on your skin, as do all lights. Blue light is helpful, but only it's the most penetrative. It goes into the sea. Any scuba dive, well, you've done scuba diving. What happens to red light? It's gone about 10 feet or so, and you go down, and then you get nothing but blue, and violet actually leaves before the blue. Blue is the turnaround point, so it's very powerful for circadian rhythms. That's why going out in the light from time to time, or eating foods that are irradiated at certain times of the day, if you can't get out in the light, will actually calibrate your circadian rhythms by a part of the brain called the ventromedial nucleus. We hear about the supramedial nucleus, but you rarely hear about that. Food is a big timer.
That's awesome. Yeah, like people talk about the vitamin D, vitamin D receptor, but there's the RDR, or there's different. I can't think about it right now. Morley Robbins goes in. I think RXR or something like that. There's a receptor that you need to use vitamin D. It's not talked about, but that's what makes sense about your time conscious eating or solar eating is that what you just said with because the fruits and vegetables, they absorb different wavelengths of light, and then our organs and our glands work on different frequencies or different colors at different times of day, right? So you're just syncing that up. That's like, is that accurate? Or
You got it. In fact, it's like a tree, the first rays of the sun go to a tree. So farther Kneep in Germany, you would go walking on the grass because it was the coldest just before dawn because there's no light energy and it's not metabolizing. But up in the trees, they're getting the light. They're eating. Now, a tree that grows a certain height, they photosynthetically turn off at high noon. They actually turn off if they get tall enough. And I mean, you have to be up to a redwood or something. But it shows the function that the taller you get, the earlier the rays. That's why nuts look like a brain, even a walnut, a coconut, and you evolve by taking a coconut. The crabs that eat the coconuts in the ocean, they are smarter than the other crabs because they activate the brain. Midday, you want to work on your gut. Then you eat your vine foods, your grass foods. You want to get your liver, your kidneys, Mr. Happy, Miss Happy. Then you use your root vegetables. We even call sexual organs roots. And if you look at the Chinese aphrodisiacs, they're all roots.
ginseng.
Yeah, I mean, the whole bunch of, what is it, the maca, dong quai, on and on and on. There's a whole list of them.
Hoshu Wu, right?
There's another one, yeah. All roots. Or bird's nest soup, which is actually made from sea products, so that's another aphrodisiac. They come from the sea. If you want to, and that's why yogis say, oh, don't eat those garlic and onions because it's going to affect your meditation. Well, you want to meditate in the morning when you eat the coconut. But at nighttime, then let Mr. Happy have his time.
That's so funny. Yeah, I think Bob Beck, that made the Beck Protocol, he was saying, like, if you want to kill someone, they used to like coat a bullet or an arrow in garlic, and then they would shoot them. I don't know if there's truth to that. Depends on the state of the person. But he was saying that the compound in the garlic is poison if it's in high amounts, and it goes directly into the bloodstream without being processed.
Interesting. Without eating it through your mouth, it could be. But theoretically, the cult of the stinking rose has a lot of benefits. I might be diverting from Ray Pete, but there's a lot of... it's one of the best things you can do for your liver, definitely, is garlic. Now, you can get too much of it, and one of the best, in this case, it's a fermented garlic. And usually, I don't eat fermented food, but Persian garlic soaked for 3 years till it turns black will clean your liver better than anything you can imagine. But it takes 3 years. Well, actually, 1 year it will start to do the job. By 3 years, it doesn't look very good, but it cleans your liver. I know someone who regenerated his liver with Persian garlic.
Wow. I have carnivore friends that age their liver in the fridge like for months and months, and then they eat like rotten liver. It's raw. It's pretty intense. I don't know if I'll ever get to that level.
Yeah, I'm suspicious of fermentation, have been even before Ray Pete, but, let's put it this way, the lactic acid formula. When I was into TM, I got initiated into transcendental meditation in 1970. Lactic acid was the devil. You're meditating to get rid of that lactic acid. All the studies by Benson and all these other people were showing. So then I end up managing a health food store. Why am I promoting lactic acid for these people? I don't get it. And so I didn't promote it because I knew that lactic acid is a stress level, as they know today. So there's two stories there. Now I'm sure even Ray Pete says a little sauerkraut, not a health food, but it's not going to kill you or anything like that. And sauerkraut for a hangover works great back in my drinking days. The only thing that worked.
That's funny. Yeah, sometimes I'll like a little bit of Jun or a really high quality like small batch kombucha with a heavy meal, and I do feel maybe it's the acids in there. It feels good, but it's not too often.
I'm kind of Andrew Weil's view. If you have an infection, kombucha. But to take it as a regular supplement is ridiculous, and I agree with him on that.
Okay, awesome. So moving on with the Q&A cholesterol, and I get this question quite often. I think they're just referring, and actually that's actually the next question too. They're doing the Ray Pete thing, they're having carbs, but their cholesterol doubled and they're worried. Do I have to stop the diet? But really it's when you increase the metabolism and get the thyroid functioning, then that will lower the cholesterol. Is my understanding right? Like high cholesterol means a suppressed thyroid generally.
It can, and as Ray Peters pointed out, they did studies, fed people 20 eggs, and it took above 20 eggs to raise the cholesterol, and oranges raised it better. So if you want to raise your cholesterol, eat the orange. That's where it's coming from. And indeed, I dated a nurse, been a nurse for years, and she said there's no problem with 300 on the cholesterol. And even you can go low to 80, but you're safer, as Ray Pete says, at about 280 when you get older because cholesterol is a virtue. Revisi also found out that with the problem with cholesterol, it went in the wrong place. Cholesterol is necessary to build a cell. The cell is supposed to be acidic. Cancer does not occur in an acidic state unless it's too acid. But the cholesterol is meant to be there. Well, when you eat at the wrong time or the wrong types or get in stress, the cholesterol comes out into the pipes. It's not supposed to be in the pipes, it's supposed to be in the cells. So they should be measuring the amount of cholesterol in the cell and in the serum, in the blood serum. But it's easier to measure in the serum. So usually it is a problem because you're low on cholesterol in the cell because it's deficient and it can't get in the cell. And Revisi really, I think, was more right on than anybody else. So it means you're eating the wrong foods, and the cholesterol is there for protection, by the way. When you have plaque, you'll see over and over, oh, it's the saturated fat making the plaque. It's not. Go into textbooks in the know, and they'll say, it's omega-3s that are making the plaque. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and I think vitamin A or retinol plays a role to make the precursor hormone. I believe it's pregnenolone, and then that makes all the other steroid hormones. But cholesterol is needed to make all the hormones, but you need vitamin A and thyroid. And
if you have cholesterol, you need sunshine. And look at this experiment. They deprived mice of any vitamins and minerals, and they got sick. And they fed them cholesterol that they kept in the dark for 1 week, and the mice died. They take that same cholesterol that had no vitamins or minerals, whatever, and they put it out in the sun for an hour, and they injected it in the mice, and they lived and thrived without the vitamins or minerals, just with the activated cholesterol. And people have known that 100 years ago, and it's been totally forgotten. I call it medical amnesia.
That's cool. Heliotherapy, right?
And you can get vitamin D out of anything you activate in the sun if people are worried about vitamin D. But vitamin D really doesn't have that much of an effect. Look at the Aleutians. The Aleutians in the Aleutian Islands, the Aleuts, had the strongest bones in the world. And where did they get their vitamin D? Oh, they ate the whales. Oh, so the whales swam south every day and came back at midnight so they could eat them. Oh, what they got it from the krill. Oh, the krill swam all the way down or took a jet plane to the equator, got their vitamin D, and the sun came back and fed the Eskimos. Where did they get the vitamin D? It's dark up there. So there's a lot of nonsense about vitamin D. And vitamin D is not necessary for calcium absorption. And in fact, in one point, anything over 400 IU was considered poisonous.
Wow.
That's changed. Now they're taking, 500,000, they're telling people. Mark Circus, these people are all going crazy on it. And, well, I won't go into it, but certain people promoting vitamin D are on pharmaceutical payrolls to say that. But I'm not going to mention it. But you can find that on the internet if you look around. And also the tanning beds have this one person on their payroll. Go and get burned, get cancer, but also get plenty of vitamin D by going out in the sun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my understanding like magnesium regulates all the calcitropic hormones, like hormone D, calcitonin. And if you're magnesium deficient, raising your vitamin D can cause so many issues. So it's like that balance.
I prefer to get it naturally. So I do go outside. In fact, the more, when people say that the skin ages, the butt doesn't. So moon the sun is what I say. If you think you're going to be low in it, go out. In fact, at high noon, at various times of year, even during the winter often in California here, Just moon the sun for 10 minutes, and you got all the vitamin C you're going to need for the day and maybe for the week in some cases.
And PUFAs in the skin will increase your susceptibility to sunburn, right? Versus having a lot of saturated fat there.
Definitely. Some people with the right type of fat can stay out in the sun for long periods of time. Yeah, have resistance to it.
That's awesome. So this kind of actually segues the next question. I heard him say once that rancid saturated fats can cause lipofuscin as well. What can we do to avoid letting them go rancid or consuming rancid oils? Would eating fresh coconut flesh instead of the oil help, for example?
It's not a major problem, but it's always good to have fresher foods. I think I mentioned something about coconut oil actually can go rancid, but it's not the type Ray Pete takes. He's taking the actual oil. When you buy it from the hippie health food store, you're buying coconut that has vitamin E. Well, coconut oil doesn't have vitamin E. They extract it out in the type Ray Pete's taking. He gets vitamin E elsewhere, so why take it there? So you're actually getting protein fragments that get rotten. Now, because there's not that many in that kind of natural coconut oil, it takes a while to be rancid. But I wouldn't keep coconut oil out on the shelf for more than a year or so, because you will be taking rancid products. I don't think it's going to kill anybody, though. A little bit. Again, the liver can handle a little bit, and you're better off than taking fish oil, for sure.
And it's refined versus unrefined, right? Like refined is actually more stable because there's less of those protein fragments.
More stable, yeah. Because once you get the oil is almost unbreakable. It doesn't break down. It actually will, but it's almost immortal. But you take the other products in it, the proteins and the vitamins in it, they break down. And vitamins can break down to toxic byproducts after a long period of time, sometimes shorter periods of time. It's always best to get your vitamins and minerals and things as fresh as possible. Even minerals die. Sir Chandra Jacuzzis Bose. I got the backwards. Jacuzzis Chandra Bose was a scientist who proved that various minerals are alive by themselves. They die. It's called metal fatigue. And tin was the liveliest of them all. Platinum was in there.
I had a friend ask me, do you lose minerals by cooking? But generally, no, right?
It's really hard to lose them by cooking, yeah. It's really hard. But I guess if you cooked them too much, beyond a pressure cooker, you would kill the mineral. You can actually kill a mineral. Yeah, and Bose's research is available on the internet for anybody to check it out. He's the first one that said plants can think. And they thought he was nuts. They censored him. They took his... he wasn't making any money as a professor in India and everything, and now they're finding out he's right. That plants have nervous systems, and they can think. And they know. If you come along... Well, animals in Africa, they go to a tree, and they start nibbling on it. And the tree says, sure, nibble on me. But there's a famine, so they start eating the tree. The tree puts a chemical, a salicylate, in the wind to the next tree, and then they find all these dead animals all around the trees. And they wonder, what's killing them? The plants. They didn't want them to be... It was between them and the herbivore. The herbivore's got to go. And they killed them. So they have communication and can talk. A whole root system underneath that farmers cut into that root system. There's a communication that goes hundreds of miles. Aspens are notorious for it, but other plants have it too. The bacteria, the fungus, all of that is in communication, and nature is one. It's not separate in little squares that we conveniently cut off.
Yeah, it's like the wood wide web, right? Like with the forests and the polysaccharides that it'll send to different trees and to keep that whole row going. And it's interesting.
Great name. In fact, salicylates are used as poisons and as communication between them. That's how they send it by the wind, and they also use infrared radiation. They have an elaborate communication system. Yeah.
Is that related to acetyl salicylic acid, like an aspirin? It's like a similar.
It is, which is a detoxified one. The aspirin is actually less toxic than the willow, but because the willow has so little of it in, you're not going to notice getting poisoned. But if you took the amount in an aspirin and took it as the willow chemical, the salicylate and not the acetylsalicylic acid, which is actually more like a salt, you could actually be poisoned by it.
Wow. Interesting. Can you ask Adam what his thoughts are on reversing tooth decay? I think we kind of got into that a little bit, but I don't know. Fat soluble vitamins, calcium.
That helps. Now, I learned about this too late. My teeth got trashed. And I marvel at people who have, I met a guy in Sedona, 102 years old, every tooth, never went to the dentist, ever. He had all his teeth and he didn't need glasses. So I marvel at certain people like that, and I notice that fruit eaters tend to do it more. If you go down to Mexico, look at the white teeth and how brilliant they are. So it's calcium foods and, strangely enough, sweet fruit and sugared foods, but the carbohydrates that stick to your teeth, and I was a carb freak. I mean, I ate all these grains and breads and rye bread and every type of bread in the book. It was supposed to be healthy. Don Peters is a bodybuilder, so he told me to eat 7 sandwiches for lunch. So I'm eating 7 sandwiches for lunch and forcing food down me. I gained some weight. But Don Peters, by the way, died of liver cancer, so he wasn't doing too well with that either.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, I use a water pick, and then I use a Dr. Tongue's. He made the tongue scraper. It's an ionic toothbrush. That's kind of cool. It actually makes the bristles positive charge. Like you wet your finger. It's like a $30 toothbrush. It's not battery operated, and you just put your finger on this metal part, and then it electrically cleans the plaque out of your teeth by kind of like repelling them with a positive charge. It's interesting.
It's good. Are you familiar with a blotting brush?
I think you might have mentioned that to me once. I got to look into that. Yeah.
You'll find a good video on there. And Dr. Phillips discovered he went. His entire family had a bad results on teeth all the time. So he went to a dentist and said, "You need a gingivectomy." He said, "No, I'm going to fix this myself." And the dentist said, "Young man, you got a lot to learn about life." So he went and noticed in National Geographic that the natives would go like that with the kind of a blot their teeth with a brush and with the bark mostly. So he invented a type of brush that was unpolished that would pull the stuff out of the sulcus. You know, that's the one where they say, "Oh, that's 3 millimeters deep. Tisk, tisk, tisk. You got problems. We got to cut your gums into it." So he goes back to the dentist, and his teeth are completely rebuilt. And the dentist couldn't imagine a mechanical process, so he said, "Whatever you're eating, son, keep eating it." And so if you go to his hometown, he's on cosmic vacation now, of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, they have bins, 6-foot bins in pharmacies of 2 feet deep in blotting brushes that people use. And they're in restaurants blotting. They don't brush. Blotting it sucks it out to capillary action. And it's one of the very best things people can do for your teeth. Yeah. You'll find videos on Dr. Phillips, or just a blotting brush is probably enough.
That's incredible. I just interviewed Dr. Cass Ingram. He's a really interesting fellow, forest man. He like harvests stuff from trees, and he's really big into like wild oregano and clove, and then pine and cedar resin. So I've been playing with those. My mouth loves all of those substances, especially the gums from the trees. Like there's something about the compounds in there that are really cool.
Frankincense is very good. There's a man on a video that my friend is into young living oils, essential oils, and the frankincense oil, the people who are on those trees actually have all of their teeth in there, up to 100, 103 even, and they have all of their teeth. There's something to frankincense oil.
Yeah, that's one of my, because people think about living to 200 or 300, and they're like, I don't want to look horrible and have no teeth, and that's not where I'm going to be, right? It's like I guess I'm prioritizing my teeth health to keep them all for hundreds of years. Might sound crazy to people. Don't think that's possible.
The earlier you are, the better, and there is a way to do it because yogis have done it, and they have hidden the information of people living over 126. They say the record is. Even recently, a Mexican lady, they had a lot of evidence that she really was 127, and now she's gone off the internet. There have been people. Ray Peat reports a case of someone 156 years old. Look, he's got a Wikipedia page, and they say, "Well, we don't know about this," but you'll find a lot of people listed in old medical books that they had evidence that they lived over 150. Now, the top end in Western civilization, I think, was 154, not these 300, which might be, I haven't found any evidence of that, but 150s, the highest of about 20% of these people would be 140, 142, and then most of them would be somewhere between 100 and 130. Wudang Chen, who I studied with, his master was 131 or 132. National Geographic did a special honor. They couldn't handle it. They made her 100. And he's got her history. She was 132 when she went on cosmic vacation.
Wow. Yeah, I'm trying to find Li Ching Wen. Supposedly lived to be 256. Have you heard of that guy?
I've heard of him, and I haven't seen the evidence on that, but I'd be open to it because I believe there are people like Babaji and people like that who actually have figured out how to do it. Yogis that do what you call the mobile form of samadhi, where, like the polar bear, a male polar bear does not hibernate, and yet they're in a delta brainwave state to survive the winters. They go into a type of torpor like a badger. So yogis knew what they were doing, and some of them figured out ways to not go into a burrow. Most of them went into burrows, but there are ways of mobile samadhi, and that's what I'm particularly interested in because my main teacher, Adonal Lay, was into that.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's all important. Like I think I see people saying like it's always mind over matter or matter over mind, like an atheist scientific, but I think it's both, right? And it's all of it. And diet matters, air matters, community, like it all kind of plays in, right? And the more the better that you could do.
As a buddy of mine named Conley Sullivan, who I haven't seen for years, said, it all hangs together and it all hangs together real heavy.
I love it. I think a lot of people just get tired of like trimming their nails, right? It's like there's a lot of maintenance to these bodies. So
right. There is.
You have to wash and stuff. And
Philip Mann, the acupuncturist, has proved that you can change the nail health in one day. So that whole thing of them taking all that time to grow out. And so I'm frustrated because I got my nail caught in a door. It's taken about 1.5 years for that sucker to grow out. But if I knew the secret to that, I would have regrown it because he found it in case after case of acupuncturists. He's a French acupuncturist who had some novel ideas about acupuncture.
Interesting. Can you ask him what he eats and does he feel that his, what do you eat? Yeah, that's the question.
Now, there's a wide variance of people who eat on time according to circadian rhythms. And we have access to a farmer's market, so we eat very natural, and a lot of people aren't going to be able to do it. For instance, in the daytime, today I had several nuts, keeping them at a minimum, always almonds, cashews, but 1 or 2 or 3 pistachios for eyesight. I had glasses and I gave them up after 24 years of needing glasses. I don't need them anymore. I can read in a bookstore. I don't have to have them crushed when hippies hug me, So anyway, then for fruit, we've been eating the stone fruit that's out now. So we had figs and we had plums and avocado and what else? Oh, and Kabbalah and tonic, of course, for breakfast. Lunch, we'll have like some of the fruito vegetables. I eat a lot of tomatoes, especially this time of year. We have cucumbers. We have Peppers, and we have zucchini. That's what I was thinking. The zucchini, yellow crookneck squash, all of those. For protein, tomatoes actually have more preformed amino acids than meat. But I'm walking kind of a razor's edge by being low on the meat because you'll find you got to be really careful when you're doing what I'm doing. So I recommend that before you just go give up meat, be careful. When I did the same thing happened to me. When I gave up meat at a time, I got weaker. I got noticeably weaker. I couldn't do what I did, and it kind of frustrated me. Later, I got a lot of that energy back, but I recommend that people do have some kind of meat. At nighttime, we definitely have eggs, and we have a potato every night without fail. Sometimes I'll have a Japanese sweet potato, which is a white sweet potato that is just delicious. And we have beets, and we cook all the root vegetables at nighttime. I have a little raw garlic and a little raw onion, and they're cooked in butter. And let's see, and some other things too. What else? Carrots. The carrot salad, especially Vibrant Gal is really big on every night. Make sure she gets that carrot salad.
I feel that one. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. And with tomatoes, because you hear about the carotenoids, and Ray Pete talks about how they suppress the thyroid. You might, like with lycopene in tomatoes, maybe you would have to be eating like gallons of tomatoes a day to get large doses. Or
I think so. Again, the circadian rhythms make a difference. And I found people, like I always had a tolerance for carotenoids, but I knew about the problems with carotenoids. If a person has a metabolic problem, cancer, diabetes, things like that, they turn orange. No matter how much I drank gallons of it, I never turned orange. I never turned color. My liver was so strong it would metabolize it. Now I haven't tried it because I realized that your vitamin A is better from your eggs and things like that than it is from carotenoids. But if a person is turning orange, they're in danger. They are not metabolizing. It's leaning toward cancer, arthritis, diabetes. There's a list of metabolic type and inflammatory diseases that are involved. But I did okay because I tried to turn orange. I tried to get carotemia. I couldn't do it. And then I realized that people with improper systems. Now, say I did that for 30 years, maybe it would have caught up with me. I'd like to see some research, and I'm open to anything that people have to say about carotemia and carrots.
yeah, I can relate. When I got into vegetable juicing, I would buy those the 5 pound bag of organic carrots, and I would juice half of that bag, and then I would look at my skin, and the next day or whatever, or later on that day, I would see these orange splotches, especially on my hands. So that was I think, yeah.
There was some kind of metabolic problem. By the way, I'll tell something that contradicts some of Pete's information. He claims that carrot salad won't digest. Well, if you look at Dr. William Beaumont's effects on carrots, raw carrots will digest just as well as any other raw or cooked vegetables. It takes exactly 4 hours to break down in stomach acid in the stomach, and even measured outside the stomach, where it takes 14 hours. But lots of things take a lot more time in stomach acid outside of the stomach because the temperature is not there, the churning is not there, and the humidity, dry air, actually makes for better digestion. That's why desert people, I agree more with Edward Abbey than Ray Pete. Desert people live longer than mountain people, and high desert people may be the middle ground where they live longer than ever. The Apaches, the Bedouins, all of the Mongols, they had surprising levels of fitness and of longevity.
Interesting. Wow.
But the mountains are okay. You're in the drier climate you're in, it's a good place to be.
I was starting to get worried.
Nope, don't worry about it. Now, I would actually wonder when Ray Pete says to go up to about 8,000, 10,000 feet like that, but we acclimate. Now, some animals don't. I read in medical books, they claim a dog can't live above 10,000 feet elevation. Other animals can go up to 18,000. They can live in the Andes and Mount Everest and all of that. And to get rid of the mountain sickness, one reason they use cocaine and the coca plant in South America, which has some value, but different people have different sensitivities. And once you adjust to it, your heart gets bigger, and to me, you can still achieve long amounts of longevity, even on the long end. But for sure, on the short end, cancer is lower in the mountains. And I give it two other reasons that Pete doesn't give it. One, remember I told you about the acidic soil in the mountains? All the crap runs downhill. Also, all the pesticides and stuff run downhill. I knew a real estate person who only bought on hills. They never bought in the valley because they knew all the crap ran down there. But higher you go, the more acidic the soil. The lower you go, the more alkaline the soil. And so I think that's also a fact besides the carbon dioxide, which certainly is a factor, and the pressurization, which is separate from or categorically separate, but not really separate, because none of this is really separate.
Those are really great points. ADHD and its relationship with longevity. I'm not sure what the question is, but does ADHD affect longevity, I guess?
You know, I believe, like the doctor that endorsed our book, Yes, No, Maybe, Chronobiotic Nutrition, he believes like I do. ADHD is for geniuses. The kid looks out the window instead of wanting to sit in a straight line, and they call him ADHD. There was one school, they gave 75% of the students, I think this was in Arizona, the retinol, or no, what's the drug? Whatever, it's speed, basically. They give them, what is it? Ritalin, of course,
Ritalin, yeah.
Ritalin. It basically, it's dextridine. It's a type of dextridine. I can't even pronounce it. Dexies is what we called them back in my hippie days. So I think most ADHD, except a tiny, tiny percent, is a student who is bored out of his mind, who is confined to teaching, and most of your internet gurus now, they're making their money by dropping out of school. Look at all the internet people. They've dropped out of school. Read John Taylor Gatto's book on education and see it's designed to dumb people down. Actually designed. You can go back in his references in the old books that are available on the internet and find out that it was a eugenics movement to keep people to be servants and work for the people who were in the 1% and the 10%. 1% was the people who owned the country, and the 10% were the people who, you do this and you do that. They're the managers, basically. And the managers don't live as long as the owners, and you can do this statistically, and the people who work for the managers, they live even less. And that's perfect. I really think that the keto diet is actually part of the Social Security Administration to make fit people. You can get fit on keto, but there's no longevity. So great, you show up for work, you don't get colds, and what? You don't collect your Social Security. Perfect. Now, most people doing keto, fortunately, they're not really on keto. They can do those measurements, and they're not really. Keto is starvation. It's outright starvation. So meat, however, lots of meat, as long as you have it buffered with vegetables and sweets, no problem. It's healthy. Look at the crocodile. Lives over 100. Eats lots of meat. I don't think they eat any vegetables at all, do they?
Yeah, I don't think.
Now, longevity in the sea is different. In cold weather, you're better off eating omega-3s and eating lots of meat. There is a shark in the Arctic lasts to 500. But once you get out of the water on land, then keto and carnivores don't last that long. They end up like a lion or something, except for the crocodile who takes his time, gets his food, relaxes, does some kind of meditation. They live over 100 unless they touch omega-3s.
That's awesome. There's probably enough omega-3s naturally in like grass-fed, beef or something that would.
We get it from that. Even Ray Pete is right. Cows process a lot of that out that pigs and chickens don't. But you still get some of it. I found it's hard to find cases of cattle that get yellow fat disease, but they do. But it's harder. You're much safer eating a grass-fed beef than a grain-fed beef, because even though they have less omega-3s in the grain, you have other problems that are even worse.
Definitely. Someone's asking about sugar intake and thyroid. Their nutritionist has them on 100 to 120 grams of carbs, but they want them to stay below 25 grams of sugar per day.
Interesting.
There's a certain amount you need for the thyroid to function, right?
Even look at Warren Buffett. He's just had his 89th birthday a couple of days ago. 25% of his carbs are in high fructose corn syrup. And look at Charlie Munger eating all that junk food. He's 95 going on 96 and still walking around. Some of the yogis who are doing these natural diets, you can touch their arm and break their bones. So yeah, they're alive at that point, but Charlie Munger, I'd rather be Charlie Munger than Warren Buffett. However, I don't eat high fructose corn syrup. I don't eat the peanut brittle and once in a while I will have a Coca-Cola, but at one time I didn't. But the sugar Coke, they talk about every once in a while. I think it is healthy as a afternoon caffeine jolt for people who need a little extra energy. It's great.
That's interesting you brought up high fructose corn syrup because sometimes I'm a burger and fries guy. It's like my favorite meal ever. I could eat that every day for the rest of my life and I would be happy.
Yeah.
But some of these burger joints I go to, they're using Heinz ketchup, and usually that's the one with high. I think they make a non high fructose one, but usually it has it in it. Do you know if there's any mitigation for high fructose corn syrup if you're going to eat it? Or...
Eating sweet fruit and probably
Okay.
neutralize it. Yeah, but it is as Ray Peat points, one of the problems of it, it is not really high fructose. He found
Starch.
37% as much in studies that he saw. So it's a lie.
Yeah.
Again, they've pulled something over on people that it's just a lie. So yeah, ketchup can have 25% or more of high fructose corn syrup in it now. Back in the day, I was healthier. I ate ketchup when I was just sugar in there, and I ate lots of ketchup. I put it on tomatoes. I put it on everything back in the day.
I thought I'd just maybe bring my own packets with me. You could probably buy them online, right? The real stuff.
Good idea, yeah, because it is a shame that they do that, and sugar has a bad rap, but high fructose corn syrup people are eating. Go figure.
It's like eating a raw potato, right? It's like uncooked starch, which is really bad.
Raw potato has certain medicinal things, but it's dangerous. You can get in trouble with it. It doesn't digest, and if you ate it regularly, you wouldn't survive very well. The longer cooked it is, Ray Peat and I maybe differ. He thinks an hour is long enough, but you can taste the difference in the dextrinized potato. You cook it every hour, it gets sweeter and better tasting. And right now, some of my friends are doing crock pot potatoes and letting it go for 8 hours. So to me, the longer the starch is cooked on a potato, there's a mystery too. Maybe you can ask some of your guests about this because I haven't figured out. With a potato, after you cook it, the starch is delicious. But if you let it sit around for an hour, I wouldn't eat it. It changes its ability. That's why I don't eat potatoes in restaurants, because I let them sit around. And I haven't quite figured out what that's about. It seems when you hydrate it, dextrinize it in dry and then put it in water, it seems not to do that. But a dry potato starts to get a very bad taste. And that's a good question for Ray Peat, too, why that is. But I eat lots of potatoes, fresh, right out of the oven.
So you guys do the oven method, because I think I grew up with my parents wrapping them in aluminum foil, and that's probably not ideal. But I have an Instant Pot.
It's it keeps the starch in. It's a starch potato. You get much more sugarized. That's why it's a high octane. In fact, I was down in Mexico in Jalapa with a friend of mine, and she asked the restaurant owner, could you make our potatoes? We have plenty of time, and just do them without foil. Oh, sure. Well, he tasted one of them and said, oh my God, this tastes so much better. I'm going to save all this money on aluminum foil. I'm just going to do them this way. It's a whole different taste. The other is basically like closely like eating a microwave potato, and it's a steamed potato. It's not a baked potato in foil. All that water gets in there, and it won't dextrinize properly.
Wow, what do you think about like the Instant Pot method, where it's just like almost like a pressure cooker style? Do you guys ever do that, or?
You know, I hung out with a guy who sold Vegematic, and it's 7 metals, and he could cook a potato in 10 minutes because all that heat was concentrated in there, it didn't leach out. And I don't know what it is. It tasted good. I ate it, and he would make other food like in minutes with those potatoes. So I kept telling my co-author about that, and she finally bought a set. And she uses it regularly now. Yeah,
it's a cool little machine. You just plug it in, and then I think you add a little bit of water. So it's probably maybe a steam method. I'm not sure if they're baked technically, but I used to just chop them up and do them on the stove top. But that's so much more work than doing the oven method. It takes a long time.
Oven, you just shove them in, and a convection oven, it goes faster. So I think speeding it up isn't going to be a problem. My co-authors, we always use their convection oven, and that's different from like a microwave. Is an ultimate exact opposite of dextrinization. You couldn't get more opposite. One book I read said it's a myth that they cook from the inside out. Next page, they cook from the inside out. I wish they'd make up their mind in the same book. Yeah, that's you so really funny. Do cook it from the inside out with a microwave. And I worked for the company Litton Industries that brought the first microwaves into the U.S. and we could get it then on discount for $800 for a microwave. Things have gone down since then.
That's one of the arguments that's so heated. Like Ray Peat he's actually pro microwave from what I've read, or he's like, it doesn't matter. And then some people say it changes the amino acids from what is it, the L form to the R form. It's supposed to be left. You might have told me that, I forget, but
it's really tough on the fatty vitamins, vitamin K, vitamin D, vitamin A. So yeah, now when I studied with the Donald Lay, he said, dextrinize it. He had no problem with warming it up, but I don't even want to warm it up when I found that literature about vitamin K and other elements too. And also there are what they call microwave waste products. I forget what to call it. That's not the word, but basically it's particles that are toxic. So though there's a lot of really good evidence for it, I don't use microwaves.
Convection oven sounds better. I'm glad you brought that up because that's been on my list. I just forgot about it. But that's like the ideal probably way. It's kind of a high-tech way to do it, right?
Supposedly, now this could be a false story, but supposedly it was discovered when someone's kid accidentally put a chicken in a dryer. And it tasted so good after it was cooked in the dryer that convection ovens were invented. So I don't know if that's true or not, but...
That's super funny. Yeah, I'm really into potatoes. I think growing potatoes and carrots are a really good idea. They're easy to grow and they're so versatile, right? You can use a carrot as like a antibiotic, and then you can use a potato as a sugar and protein source to a degree. And
they're very good foods. Potatoes are a superfood, no doubt about it. Look at the English could not figure out why the Irish were so healthy. They just ate dairy and potatoes. And everybody was getting sick and gout and stuff in England, and they were really aggravated. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let them get to potatoes when they had a potato famine, and 1 million Irishmen died and 2 million migrated, a lot of them to New York City and places in New York.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, that's it for the questions. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks so much for coming on. That was I like how we jumped around, and I think we covered a lot of really interesting stuff. Longevity is something that we could probably talk about for 10 hours or more, right? It's so many aspects.
There's many threads in it. I certainly don't know it all, but I'm studying hot on the trail of it. And I know there are people who can live very long and they know what they're doing. It's not just, it's a genetic monstrosity or an accident. Just not true. There are people that know what they're doing, and I want to be one of them.
Awesome.
I know you
Same.
do too.
I'll see you in 100 years for sure.
You bet. It's a date.
All right, Adam. Well, hang on the show, and we'll close it out. Thanks so much.
Okay.
That wraps up round 3 with Atom Bergstrom. Hope you guys liked that. It's always fun talking with them. I love the part about birthday cards and how Hallmark is kind of in on this deathist kind of programming. I think that's one of the major things that influences longevity is stress and just having these mental programs, because our brain is like a computer, and so it will run these programs that we get even through birthday cards, right? Reading these really negative, you're down the hill, after 40, you're done. Just get used to the pain, and it doesn't have to be that way. And that's actually an unnatural way to age. We're not supposed to be in pain, especially between 40 and 50. That's just ridiculous. So if you want to check out Atom Bergstrom's work, solartiming.com is a great resource, and that has links to all of his books and interviews are on there. Just really amazing stuff. His writings on omega-3s and lipofuscin are just a game changer. So definitely head over there and purchase one of his ebooks. They're all great. And if you want to support my work, you can go to matt-blackburn.com, and I have all of my recommended products there. And I'm constantly going through and updating them. And a lot of people ask me where to start with health, what to take. And all of the supplements on there are relatively safe. Spore-based probiotic, the beef liver, my enzyme products. And these are all things that I take myself pretty much every single day. And I also have a brand called Mitolife, and you can find that at mitolife.co. And I have 3 enzyme products. I just released a Shilajit product, and I'm actually coming out with a surprise one. So I'm really excited about this one. It's going to help with PUFA, and that's going to come out no later than September 18th. So just check the site, and it should be live by then. Today's quote is by Atom Bergstrom from his book, Age Spots, Omega-3 Barcodes. An age spot is an omega-3 barcode. It's the mark of the fish, mark of the flax, mark of the chia pet, mark of the outer space algae, NASA's frankenalgae. It's the mark of infectious lipofuscin. One cell containing age pigment is contagious to another cell not containing it. Age spots are not just a boots-on-the-ground military operation either, infecting adjacent cells. Age pigment uses naval tactics to subdue distant shorelines by riding the tides of the body's internal sea. Lipofuscin is mass-produced by these 4 Kryptonian supervillains: DHA, General Zod, EPA, Non, ALA, Ursa, and Iron, Lex Luthor.